This is gonna be an interesting one. In 2024, I made 2 video essays recapping the 11th and 12th Doctor's tenures in popular British sci-fi TV show Doctor Who, going over the themes and the narratives, and trying to put into words why I consider them my favourite periods of the show. And you know what? It was great. Focusing on the positives, looking back on the show that has genuinely defined so much of my life for about as long as I can remember, and seeing my thoughts and words resonate with so many people. There's really nothing like it. So anyway, on to the Chibnall era. Yep, the 13th Doctor. I'm sure the comments on this video are going to be incredibly civil and rational. Jodie Whittaker was different to all the others, as she was the first Doctor to be from Yorkshire, which really divided the fanbase. No, but really, Jodie's time on the show isn't looked back on the most fondly. It definitely made its mark on the show and is still talked about a lot now, but not always for the best reasons. Now, I will say that a lot of hate towards this era was not justified, a fair chunk of it coming from obvious bad faith criticisms that purely boil down to misogyny. That aside, there are genuine criticisms to be had with this period of the show. I don't really have a nostalgic connection to it like I do with the rest of New Who, and I've never felt a particularly strong urge to go back and rewatch it. But it's been a few years, the dust has long settled, so now it's time to look back on the Chibnall era with fresh, matured, creamy eyes, and see how it holds up a few years on. A quick disclaimer, as you can tell, this video is kinda long. Not as long as the other 2, but, as I say, these videos are purely passion projects, but you know who's coming next, so if you do end up enjoying the video and you want to see that video whenever it drops, then consider subscribing, and yeah, let's get into it. Chris Chibnall's name was written in the Doctor Who Death Note in January of 2016, when he was announced as showrunner. In all honesty, I was a bit confused by this decision, as Chibnall had written a few Doctor Who episodes during the Tennant and Smith eras, and yeah, I don't consider these episodes to be that great. They do tend to have recurring problems too, like bland characters that it's hard to feel any attachment to, weird pacing, a seemingly incessant need on a countdown to make the plot happen. That's not to say they don't have their moments. Cold Blood is carried by the ending, and that scene in The Power of Three with the Doctor and Amy talking is one of my favourite moments of the 11th Doctor era. But overall, if you gave me all the recurring writers of New Who and told me to pick one to be showrunner, Chris Chibnall would not be very high on my list. Way above Gareth Roberts and just below a hydrogen bomb. It's not even like Chibnall is incapable of writing good Doctor Who related material. The guy wrote some absolute bangers for Torchwood. Countryside, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Adrift, Exit Wounds, Fuck Go Back, but it's safe to assume the main reason he got hired as showrunner was because of his work on Broadchurch. Which, to be fair, from what I've seen, is a good show, and was arguably the biggest show in the UK when he was announced as showrunner for Doctor Who. He was also showrunner for Law & Order UK, Camelot, and he was head writer for Series 1 and 2 of Torchwood. Regardless of the actual quality of his work, there's no denying he had the experience. Yeah, apparently no one else wanted to take over from Stephen Moffat as showrunner, and according to Chibnall, no one wanted to take over from him until RTD stepped up. But Toby Whithouse has gone on record to say he would have loved to take the job, but wasn't asked. And I just don't get that. Whithouse has experience managing shows, being the creator and showrunner of Being Human. And you cannot deny he's written some bang Doctor Who episodes. The God Complex, A Town Called Mercy, the Under the Lake two-parter. Get this man in charge. So, when you look past that IRL plot hole, it seems like Chibnall was more obliged to take the job than anything. But regardless, he was the one who wore the trousers now, and he was gonna leave his impact on the show, for better or for worse. Oh god. The hunt for the 13th Doctor occurred throughout the first half of 2017, with heavy rumours of the next Doctor being played by a woman. The idea had been thrown around since the 80s, with the show's original creator, Sidney Newman, suggesting the idea. And with plenty of confirmations in the years since that regeneration can change sex, it was only a matter of time at this point. As usual, there were plenty of bets and predictions as to who the 13th Doctor could be. One of the most common picks was Chris Marshall. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who worked with Chibnall on Broadchurch, was a popular choice. Tom Rosenthal was, and still is, a popular pick, best known for playing Johnny in Channel 4's sitcom Friday Night Dinner.
All dead from causes unknown, and their flesh glowing. Why's it all red? Why's it all red?
And of course, Richard Ayoade was one of the top picks. Yeah, I'm not getting into that again. In the days leading up to the reveal, though, odds suddenly spiked for this Jodie Whittaker person. Strange. I don't know who that is. Oh hey, the reveal's happening now. I can't wait to see who it is. I bet it's Chris Marsh. Oh my god. Jodie Whittaker was revealed as the 13th Doctor on the 16th of July 2017 after a sports game. I don't know, man. I'm a Doctor Who fan. You think I know about that shit?
Did you see that ludicrous display last night?
I remember when this happened. I was 12, nearly 13, and if you're wondering how I reacted to this reveal, I was still at a point in my life where I considered attack helicopter jokes to be the peak of comedy. Thankfully, my opinions have changed since then, but yeah, if you came here hoping I would spend 3 hours hating women, come back next week, I'll have something ready for you then. Now, something that I've always found kinda dumb is that Jodie was encouraged not to watch Doctor Who before taking on the role, being told that it would help make the role her own. I mean, John Hurt never watched Doctor Who and had no idea what was going on the set of the 50th anniversary, but I think that helped his performance, as he was supposed to be a distant, old, confused Doctor who feels disconnected from the rest of them. Here, though, I don't know, I definitely don't think it helped. So how did our first actual impression of the 13th Doctor go? Well, the 12th Doctor's life ends with him saying goodbye to his friends one last time. His character arc leading up to this moment. The moment where he does what's right instead of what he wants. He passes down all his knowledge to the next Doctor before finally regenerating. The 13th Doctor takes in her surroundings and immediately crashes the TARDIS. Haha, woman driver, joked 1,000 divorced dads in unison, completely ignoring the fact that the previous 3 Doctors also crashed the TARDIS immediately after regenerating. And so, the Doctor goes plummeting into the north of England. And they say 13 isn't an unlucky number. The 13th Doctor's first episode is an interesting start, to say the least. There's a lot that the woman who fell to Earth has to get right here. Establishing the characters, telling a good story, killing Bradley Walsh's wife. First of all, I've got to mention the updated camera quality. It's a really nice improvement, like the show finally made the jump to an HD console. Man, these graphics are realistic. So, we start with one of the main characters of this series, Ryan, recording a YouTube video. How does he have 11 likes and only 19 views? Who's he getting to like the video? His nan? Oh wait, no. Things are off to a pretty solid start, as we see Ryan struggling to ride a bike, with his nan and step-granddad encouraging him. We also learn he isn't willing to call Graham Grandad, which is communicated smoothly.
Keep your eye on Grandad.
You mean Graham?
Ryan has dyspraxia, a disorder which, among other things, affects coordination and motor skills. Now, I have dyspraxia myself, and I'd only been diagnosed a few months before this episode aired, so when I saw this, I was excited. Like, hell yeah, one of the main characters in my favourite TV show has something I can personally relate to. Now I know how all those Phantom Menace guys felt when Luke kissed his sister. So yeah, Ryan gets frustrated because he can't ride a bike. A common struggle for people with dyspraxia. Personally, I'd never really struggled learning to ride a bike, so that's not something I can relate to specifically, but his lack of confidence and frustration at being unable to do something everyone else can do just fine is very relatable. I get why they'd want to do this on grass, but could they only find flat grass at the top of a hill?
I just want to make you proud.
Okay, bit of an awkward and forced line there, but sure. So Ryan goes to find his bike, but finds some shapes in the woods, and when he touches them, the big blue onion appears. His immediate response is to call the police, once again suggesting he isn't very confident in himself, and also suggesting he relies on others when unsure or scared. It's here we're introduced to another main character, Yaz, a police officer / Disney princess who dreams of more, and you know that because she explicitly says so.
I want to do more.
Genuinely, if they took this one line out, I think the rest of this interaction would have been fine. Like, it wasn't hard to infer that from the rest of Yaz's dialogue. Yaz gets put on the case of Ryan's big onion. I have such a way with words. Yaz, for some reason, accuses Ryan of dumping the giant onion here, which, given her profession and Ryan's skin colour, definitely has connotations. But hey, there's an episode coming up that's all about racism, so maybe this will be addressed then. Right, I want to address this early on. Ryan's line deliveries aren't great. A lot of his lines just feel kind of wooden and stunted, and I'm not sure why, because Tosin Cole is not a bad actor. I don't know if it's because of the script or the accent he puts on, but it's just not very good. So Graham and Grace get attacked by the scribble monster from Fear Her, but get saved when the Doctor falls into the train. No way, what are the chances? Honestly, the Doctor's introduction here is alright. The first time we ever see the new Doctor in action, they tend to either be commanding the scene or losing it, and yeah, she does that here.
Tongue?
Tongue!
The Doctor tells Yaz not to report this stuff on the train to the police, but, like, a train driver died, and like Yaz says, there's CCTV footage. They're gonna wonder why she didn't report this, aren't they? Now, I'm gonna ask you to go ahead and take a guess. Which of these events do you think Ryan has the bigger reaction to? Finding out he has a bomb in his body which will melt his DNA at any moment? Or his phone getting reformatted?
No, all my stuff's on there.
And it's not just him. None of these guys freak out. Even though I reckon this is a pretty freak-out-worthy thing. There's a really interesting moment here with a lot of potential to expand on Ryan and Graham's relationship.
Why here? Why tonight?
Actually, that might have been me.
Suppose you'll be blaming this on the dyspraxia as well. Can't ride a bike, started an alien invasion.
We might have just chalked up Ryan's earlier apathy towards Graham as him being immature, but this line heavily implies that there's more to it. That Ryan feels distant from Graham because of the latter's verbal abuse and refusal to try and understand Ryan's disability. This adds a whole new layer to their dynamic, and there's an incredibly easy opportunity here for an arc spanning the entire series, where Ryan and Graham learn to understand and care for each other. Or, you know, literally anything could come from this. Anything at all. That'd be pretty cool. There's also another good moment from the Doctor here, where she acknowledges how crazy regeneration is, and admits she's still struggling with her identity, but puts it aside to help others. And then she makes a sonic screwdriver from scratch. Yeah, this is just really solid. It hints at this new Doctor being really into gadgets and making stuff. Right, there's another thing that happens a few times in this episode, and a lot of times in the rest of the 13th Doctor era. Characters just standing still while talking. Characters just moving, walking around, doing things while talking is probably not something you even notice until it's not there, but it just feels really awkward.
This is my home, and I'm not having it being an alien battleground.
Like, I'm fully expecting Yaz to walk up to the Doctor and start waving her arms about or something while saying this, but she doesn't. And this kind of thing does really make a difference. I remember feeling so refreshed watching The Star Beast as it aired. Watching Donna walk around her kitchen, doing things while talking to Sylvia, things felt natural again. They also show Ryan struggling to climb a ladder, another common trait of dyspraxia, which is a nice little touch. Now, I do really like the way the Tooth Guy is defeated. It's a cool subversion, it fits all the puzzle pieces of the episode together, it's very solid. And also, it results in Grace dying, which does hit pretty hard. She was definitely one of the better characterized people in the episode. And her line beforehand of,
"Is it wrong to be enjoying this?"
is a lot more sad on rewatch. You know, I love the chase, but I always forget Bradley Walsh can genuinely act. This also taps into a fear of death Graham has due to him having cancer. He's got a fair bit of nuance in this episode, trying to be kind and do his best for those around him, but having an occasional cruel and unempathetic side that he only really shows to Ryan. I would easily consider him to be the most interesting of all the companions so far. I also think the Doctor's characterization in this episode is pretty strong. It's not the best introduction to the character, but there is definitely still that eccentricity with some unique character traits that can be explored in future episodes. Ryan and Yaz are also in this episode.
That's what you're going with.
Too jazzy?
And so, the episode ends with the Doctor locating the TARDIS, and teleporting everyone there. Haha JK lol. And that's the woman who fell to Earth. And honestly, it's alright. I think there's definitely some dodgy dialogue and awkward moments, and things feel a little overcrowded, but the pieces are definitely there to create a functional team dynamic. And there's plenty of stuff in this episode that could come back in future. The plot itself is fine, and I do really enjoy the third act. But yeah, overall, not a bad series opener in its own right. And so, the gang are in space. Less than a minute to live. How is the Doctor gonna get them out of this one?
What do you think? A spaceship is just gonna appear out of the blue?
Are you kidding me? The same bit?
So, it turns out the planet isn't there. And in the, 30 seconds before they die, a spaceship spawns in that was also looking for the planet. I mean, even if you factor that in, that's pretty crazy timing.
Oh, sorry, Az, I forgot you were there.
I swear the show is doing this deliberately.
You were right. She's still alive.
You know, this isn't even the first time this has happened in this era so far. A character's first line hints at their personality or relationship with others in a natural way, only for them to become 2D caricatures after that. Like, this is a good way of introducing him as the guy who doesn't care about others, and it's pretty easy for the audience to understand that from that one line. But then...
No one cares. I don't need other people.
Why'd you even care?
Like, yeah, we know, mate. Okay, so let's put things into context here. These guys have literally just met the Doctor, and she would have got them killed if they didn't get saved by some of the luckiest timing in history, and then nearly got them all killed in a spaceship crash landing. Anyone would be a little bit annoyed at this point, don't you think? Not these guys, they just ask the same questions so the Doctor can exposition dump.
Only one will claim the prize.
What's the prize?
3.2 trillion crimp.
Are we eligible too?
Why did Ryan suddenly become super competitive and eager to win some random space money here? Like, it's an interesting side of him, and it would be great if this were expanded on in future. These guys all have to travel across the planet to get to the Ghost Monument, which is actually the TARDIS. But they can't go out at night because zombies and creepers will spawn or something. Also, the water is deadly, but we never actually see what it can do, so there is kind of a disconnect there, but whatever.
Hey, yes, can you believe it? Alien planet, man.
Wow, very insightful. Thanks, Plank of Wood. Alright, time for this scene. You probably know about this scene. The gang, I refuse to call them the fam, shut up, are surrounded by sniper robots. The Doctor seems to be forming a plan, but Ryan grabs a gun, believing he can win against these sniper robots, because he's played Call of Duty. Mate, I've played Mario, doesn't mean I do shrooms. Well, and here's the thing, he actually shoots the robots with pinpoint accuracy. Did Chris Chibnall just forget about the fucking disability he gave his character? Ryan's characterization in this episode is strange. In the first episode, he was quite timid, unconfident, and often held back by his dyspraxia. But then, one episode later, he's competitive, inquisitive, and overconfident. Now, maybe all these sudden new experiences, including the death of his nan, have caused him to swing the complete other way character-wise. I highly doubt that was the intention, but let's just say that's what's happening here. You should show signs of that characterization in the first episode so this feels more natural, rather than what it is, which is the complete opposite of what we previously knew about Ryan. Ryan is often called the most boring of the main cast, which is a shame, because I genuinely think he's the one who had the most potential out of all of them. There are so many pieces here that would have made an interesting, layered character had they been expanded on. His reluctance towards Graham, which likely comes down to the verbal abuse he receives, that goes nowhere. His desire for money and competition, that could link back to his YouTube channel. Does he dream of being a big YouTuber? To make loads of money, get into boxing, message his underage fans? This scene could have been the start of a contentious relationship between him and the Doctor, as their morals clash and she tries to teach him to be more mature and sensible about things. There's also a moment in the next episode where Ryan and Yaz's relationship could take a turn, or at least they could clash in some way. But they don't. It's genuinely painful watching the way Series 11 does characterization, because the potential is absolutely there, and it's staring me in the eyes before pulling out a gun and shooting itself.
It's not my favourite thing, climbing ladders under pressure.
Hey, come on, man, you can do this. Surely you've played Snakes and Ladders before. You've trained for this.
Take one of your heroic naps, and we'll wake you when we leave.
Fine.
Isn't your whole thing that you just want to win? Why would you agree to this? Anyway, the Doctor defeats the evil napkins by igniting the atmosphere with Epso's cigar, which lights after you click your fingers. Seems like a dangerous thing to keep in your pockets, but whatever. Now, towards the end, the Doctor acts kind of defeated. She just kind of gives up because the TARDIS isn't there, even though she knew the engines were phasing in and out. It's weird seeing the Doctor so lacking in confidence. Historically, and even after this incarnation, the Doctor would always have hope. Even if they were certain they weren't going to survive the adventure, they'd keep fighting to the end. The previous Doctor died believing he'd let all his friends down, but still kept hope and optimism for the future. So to go from the most determined and hopeful Doctor to this lack of confidence is just kind of weird. Anyway, new TARDIS console, I think it looks good, and the episode ends. Now, you may have found this hard to infer from all of my dialogue, so allow me to spell it out directly. I'm not a big fan of the Ghost Monument. I think there's an overall lack of threat, and when there is a threat, it's not communicated to the audience very well. Some of the main characters' behaviour is antithetical to what we learned about them in the previous episode. There's absolutely zero tension or distrust towards the Doctor, when there really should be at least one moment where all the companions have a go at her. The side characters are pretty two-dimensional, and overall, it just feels quite disjointed and awkward a lot of the time. Not a very good second episode in all honesty. Surely episode 3 picks things up again. Right, episode 3 is Rosa, a historical episode all about Rosa Parks, and mate, I genuinely cannot believe this episode was allowed to broadcast the way it is. There is just so much fundamentally wrong with this episode, it baffles me. Firstly, the plot itself is just awful. Basically, the team travels back to 1950s Alabama, and they meet Rosa Parks. But, lo and behold, a nerdrotic fan has travelled back in time as well, to kill Rosa before she can kickstart the civil rights movement. The whole idea of this is just so stupid. The episode implies that the civil rights movement wouldn't have happened if Rosa hadn't been in the right place at the right time to refuse to give up her seat, basically chalking up this massive change in our society to coincidence, which is genuinely so dismissive and insulting to the whole movement. There were so many more incredibly influential pioneers of civil rights. Claudette Colvin, Ella Baker, A. Philip Randolph, MLK. And this episode just dismisses their efforts. Oh no, the civil rights movement is about to fail, but not to worry, here's a white woman to save the day. Can you see the issue here? Not only that, but Rosa in this episode is basically a caricature. Nothing more than a tool that purely exists to not give up her seat on the bus, when she was so much more than that. And I'm sorry, but the ending to this episode is so stupid. The main characters have to do a racism to make sure things still go to plan. They have to partake in segregation to make sure Rosa gets kicked off the bus. But they all feel guilty about it, so it's okay. So yeah, this episode is all about racism, and the episode sure does talk about it. The topic of racism is definitely brought up in at least one instance. Okay, look, the main problem with this episode's messaging is that it's too surface level. At best. The episode doesn't really go much further than racism is bad. Like, yeah, I agree. You got anything more to say? But the police aren't racist, guys, don't worry. Yeah, this scene baffles me. It seems like the episode is finally about to tackle more specific instances of racism that white people don't really have to worry or think about in their everyday lives. Stuff like police brutality. Ryan brings it up to Yaz, a POC policewoman.
How come I get stopped way more by the police than my white mates?
And her response is...
Oi, not this police.
Not all cops. Sorry, how did their first encounter go again?
You have to take this away, though. You can't dump this here.
I didn't. I can't even lift it.
Oh, come on, Ryan, it's me.
This fence sitting that the episode does is so frustrating. You were actually so close to having more than one layer of substance in your messaging. Fucking expand on this. Go further into what Ryan was talking about. Create some tension between him and Yaz. I'm not picky, just give me something. The villain of this episode is a time-traveling space racist called Costco. That's his name, don't look it up. But like, why? I honestly think this episode would have been better without a villain. Let it be a pure historical. He's not a bad villain, he's just kinda unnecessary in all honesty. There's one tiny moment I like from this episode. It's when Ryan starts telling Martin Luther King about how much his nan loved him, before remembering, she's dead. It's a good way of showing how that grief is still really raw and strong. He still hasn't fully processed or comprehended that she's gone. You know what? If the whole episode was just this one moment, maybe it would have been better. As it stands, Rosa is an indefensible mess. It completely botches its messaging, has a nonsensical storyline that actively diminishes the movement and people it's trying to support. It's filled with surface-level, on-the-fence politics, and it's just a horrifically wasted opportunity to make a great historical story about such an important part of recent history. Okay, I actually have really bad arachnophobia, and I genuinely find this episode really painful to sit through. The arachnophobia doesn't help either. Okay, honestly, for the most part, this episode is fine. There's not much that particularly stands out, good or bad. I mean, there are some pretty creepy visuals, Graham's grief gets explored. It's definitely shaping up to be one of the better episodes of the series so far. Not that the competition was particularly fierce. But then...
I've got a huge stash of weapons. She's not gonna like that.
No, I'm not. You are not shooting those creatures.
Yeah, once again, I'm sure you already know about this. The ending to this episode has been ripped to shreds many times, so surely one more wouldn't hurt. The gang needs to lure all the spiders into Jack Nicholson's panic room, containing them so they can't hurt anyone else. And this is where the episode starts tackling morality and stuff, which I definitely trust it to do. Jack Nicholson, that's his name, don't bother looking it up, wants to shoot the spiders, but everyone else wants to let the spiders starve to death or suffocate, whatever happens first. Now there is a genuine moral debate to be had here. Shame the episode doesn't seem to know that. There is some nuance here, and different people will have different views on how to handle this situation. The problem is that the episode doesn't properly convey that nuance. The Doctor just says, "Gone bad, let them starve," and we're just supposed to go along with that. Which is stupid enough on its own, but they make Jack Nicholson's argument so straightforward and empirical.
They deserve a humane, natural death.
Shooting's quicker.
The Doctor objects to this because gone bad. But this feels like a surface level interpretation of why the Doctor doesn't like guns. They're not allergic to guns. The Doctor's dislike for weapons comes down to trauma and the death and pain that those weapons cause unnecessarily. But they will use them in very extreme circumstances. But they're still killing the spiders by letting them starve, just in a slower, more painful, more claustrophobic way, which seems worse, in my opinion. The episode doesn't seem prepared to go into the nuance of this scenario, so why bother creating this nuanced scenario? Yet another example of Series 11 being so on the fence it becomes offensive. And at the end, there's a spider that's too big to breathe and is dying a slow, painful death. Jack Nicholson puts it out of its misery, and
She wasn't even a threat, she was dying anyway.
Well, then it's a mercy killing.
he's still right. How can you mess things up this badly? Why am I agreeing with your Trump parody? I don't want to agree with your Trump parody. I don't know, Arachnids in the UK, awful name by the way, was mostly alright, until it wasn't. The episode really botches its messaging at the end, and it unfortunately brings the whole thing down somewhat. What, you think I'm going to waste more than 5 seconds on this episode? Episode 6 is Demons of the Punjab. Another historical episode, all about the partition of India. Something I, and many others, didn't learn about in school. So I like the idea of bringing more attention to important parts of history that are often glossed over. This tends to be one of the highest rated episodes of Series 11, but does it deserve that rank? Well, let's see. Yaz finds out her grandma has some insane lore, but doesn't want to talk about it. So Yaz decides to get MatPat to make a game theory video all about it. Just kidding, but that would be a banger episode. No, instead, Yaz disrespects her grandma's wishes to keep things private and goes back to find out what happened anyway.
I can't wait to meet the groom.
You already have.
Remember me?
No, you can't be. You're not my...
Why would you say this out loud?
You just saw something not of this world, and you took it right in your stride.
Oh, that's still an unusual thing? Okay then.
Maybe they're out, shopping, catching a movie. I'm talking to cover up my latent worry.
Why is the Doctor worried here? Because there are aliens? Possibly doing bad things? Has 13 ever seen an episode of Doctor Who before? So the villains of this episode are the Thajarians, deadly assassins of deadliness who kill dead people. And they make that pretty clear, when the Doctor confronts them after finding them interfering with a corpse and accuses them of being murderers, they make what is quite explicitly a threat.
You must leave, or we will stand over your corpses.
But then, it's revealed at the end that these Thajarians are good guys, and they mourn people, rather than kill them. I mean, sure, but there are still some problems here. Now, it's a common misconception that the entire Thajarian race turned good after their home planet was destroyed. That's not really implied here, it's mainly implied that these two and possibly some other Thajarians changed their ways.
This is all that remains of our home, our people. They died unwitnessed, but we who returned gave up 100 generations to sift.
And that does make this ending less bad, but even with that in mind, why don't they just tell the Doctor this? She's clearly got some outdated prejudices about their race. Wouldn't they want to clear things up? Not only do they not try and clear things up, but they say things that clearly sound like threats.
You cannot prevent this. You disrupt our work.
Their line of,
You must leave, or we will stand over your corpses,
is meant to have a double meaning, like they're actually saying, you're gonna die and then we'll mourn you, but even with this new context in mind, it's still a massive stretch. It's like, yeah, I guess you could interpret it that way if you really tried and also hate subtlety. Other than that though, this episode is actually pretty good. The side characters are actually interesting, and there are some great dynamics. Prem here is pretty well characterized, and I ended up actually caring about him, especially his relationship with his brother Manish, who became radicalized after listening to GB News or something. and things get genuinely tense as he snitches to a bunch of bad guys and gets the wedding shut down, ending up killing his own brother. It's tragic and surprisingly powerful. The ending leaves a bit to be desired though. Umbrian offers to tell Yaz her hidden lore, but Yaz says no. This is framed as some noble, loving sacrifice, but she knows what happened now. Nothing has been lost. Honestly, I can see why this is one of the highest rated episodes of the series, and I might consider it my favourite so far. Honestly, if the Thajarian twist made more sense, this would be a pretty solid episode overall. That does bring it down somewhat, and I feel like, similar to Rosa, this episode would have been better as a pure historical, but there's still plenty of stuff to like here. Mainly the characters, which are surprisingly interesting compared to the caricatures we've had so far. So yeah, this is possibly my favourite episode in the series so far. But if this was in most other New Who series, it'd be maybe a bit above average. Episode 7 is Kerblam, an episode which has also been talked about to death. Believe me, I'll get to this. Honestly, for the most part, this episode is alright too. The gang go and investigate Space Amazon, as mysterious bad things are happening, such as blatant labour exploitation. The Doctor is weirdly okay with Kerblam operating the way it does, or rather, the way the system as a whole operates. Kerblam, for a time, was entirely robot-managed, but protests meant that laws were changed so that now 10% of the workforce have to be human. There's clearly a big problem here of whoever's in charge of the planet Kandoka not updating their society along with the more robot-managed direction they're taking. People presumably still need money to pay for stuff, but how can they do that with no jobs? Presumably, they've made jobs scarce, so it's easier to exploit workers. But hey, the Doctor has always stood up for the working class and isn't afraid to bring down bad organisations, so surely when she realises how bad things are, she's going to do whatever it takes to stop them. Also, Lee Mack is in this episode. Barely. Now, I love Lee Mack. Not Going Out is one of my comfort shows, so I was excited to see him in Doctor Who. He's also a big fan of the show, apparently owning his own model TARDIS and Dalek. And as if he couldn't get any more based, his favourite Doctor is Peter Capaldi, and so he finally got his long-awaited part in the show, in which he plays a sad, tired worker who misses his daughter and dies after 15 minutes. I can't lie, feels like a waste. Am I right, Lee?
Our survey said, ding!
And if anything happens to us, or anyone else here, you'll have me to answer to. Too bombastic?
Wow, way to undercut a solid moment. And while I'm talking about this, the Doctor has been oddly self-conscious in this series so far, like worried about how she comes across. It's kind of weird. The episode is pretty well paced, and there's some good action and commanding moments from the Doctor. I also like the music. Overall, the vast majority of this episode is alright. But in accordance with Chibnall policy, at least 10% of the episode has to suck. And right on cue, here comes the ending. So, the cry for help that brought the Doctor here actually came from the Kerblam system itself, because Charlie the Redditor has begun turning the bubble wrap in Kerblam deliveries into bubble wrap that makes you explode. He wants to kill loads of people to turn them against Kerblam because he disagrees with their exploitation of human workers. While the Kerblam system clearly needs changing, this is a terrible way of going about it. Now, I'm not saying violence won't cause change. A lot of social revolutions throughout history were achieved through violent means. The problem here is the fact that Charlie is going after innocent people, rather than the ones at the top. If you claim to be standing for ordinary people, then killing said ordinary people is not gonna get them on your side. Also, he doesn't even really know what he's protesting. It's not 10% of people get to work, it's 10% of workers must be human. Now, Charlie is obviously in the wrong here, but the Kerblam system is far from innocent itself. Not only does it thrive on labour exploitation, but it also killed an innocent person to get back at Charlie. That's clearly a massive problem, because as Arachnids in the UK so bravely discussed, killing is bad. So surely the Doctor, the arbiter of social change and equality, will be the voice of reason and—
The systems aren't the problem. How people use and exploit the system, that's the problem.
Nope, she defends Kerblam, completely overlooks, or rather defends, the fact that it took an innocent life, and humanizes the automated system?
And then Kira, it took her knowing how you felt about her to show you how it would feel.
She defends the blatant labour exploitation of Kerblam and says that capitalism would be all sunshine and rainbows if people didn't kill other people. You know, just ignore the complete disregard of human life from the people at the top. This is very out of character for the Doctor. especially considering this is only one series after this.
The end point of capitalism, bottom line, where human life has no value at all. Like every worker everywhere, we're fighting the suits.
Now, to be clear, both sides are bad here, but the episode doesn't seem to be aware of the shortcomings on Kerblam or the Doctor's end. Once again, we're just supposed to go along with the Doctor, without the episode giving us a valid reason why, seeing as she repeatedly uses very questionable logic and morals. I don't like being negative about this show, but God, it's so hard with this series in particular, when it just insists on having the dumbest, most surface-level moral debates. And like,
we're suspending all operations for a month.
All our workers have been given 2 weeks paid leave. And I'm going to propose that Kerblam becomes a people-led company in future.
Why is this portrayed as some happy ending? Yeah, things might get better if the capitalist robot overlords suddenly agree that exploiting the working class is bad. I don't know, man. This episode had the potential to be good, but once again, Series 11 cannot deliver its messaging right at all. Episode 8 is The Witchfinders. I really like how this episode adds personal stakes for the Doctor that we haven't really seen before. She's a woman now, for the first time since the show began, and women were the only ones targeted by the witch trials of the 1600s. The Doctor, being a white man previously, has never really had to directly face or be victim to the attitudes of centuries ago. And I mean, this is the Doctor. Of course she's going to be tried as a witch.
Who are you to address me this way?
I'll tell you who I am. Sorry, one sec.
Right, what is it with the writers giving the Doctor a big dramatic moment and then immediately undermining it with an awkward moment of self-consciousness or something? This happens a few times in this series, and I'm not really a fan of it. King James' introduction scene is pretty good. He clearly commands the room as soon as he enters, shows a lot of confidence, and his blatant misogyny and almost infantilizing of the Doctor immediately puts her at a disadvantage.
Ta-da! I'm Mr. Ring-a-ding, I make your heart bells sing.
Yaz also goes off to help the girl whose grandmother was killed. She is usually the one to talk to people, comfort them and stuff. And I mean, it's a character trait, which is a rare specimen in this series, so I'll take it. The episode starts getting really interesting about halfway through, when the Doctor finds these mud zombies. I love their design, they're really creepy and uncanny valley, and when presented with something they can't understand, the King and Magistrate blame the Doctor. Things fall apart so quickly, and I'm really invested now.
I am King James, Satan's greatest foe.
Yeah. It must be comforting playing that role. Hiding behind a title.
Just as you hide behind Doctor.
Oh, I like this guy. Now, there's a twist that the Magistrate was the one who caused all the mud zombies, and that she's been possessed, and I actually like this twist. The clues were there, it feels natural, and it makes sense. The Willow girl, whose granny was dunked at the start, was treated like a red herring earlier in the episode, which I thought was fine, apart from this one line.
Here, Granny's specialty, unless you think I'm a witch.
I think that line was a bit too on the nose, especially since Willow had spent the whole episode so far crying or just being sad. So for her to make a sudden, risky joke like this is a bit strange. I think her other lines in this scene and the Doctor's obvious suspicion were already enough on their own. Anyway, yeah, the evil tentacles and mud zombies are defeated. The Doctor doesn't like King James because he killed the leader of the mud zombies, and the episode ends. Honestly, watching this episode, I got such a strong sense of disappointment. Not because the episode was bad, quite the opposite. It just proves to me that the potential was absolutely there to make a really good, gripping episode of Doctor Who, that most of Series 11 failed to reach. The Witchfinders shows genuine promise, with interesting characters, an enticing plot, a good mystery with a solid twist, and some really creepy imagery. I really enjoyed it, easily my favourite episode of the series. The heaven sent of Series 11, if you will. In classic Doctor Who fashion, this amazing showcase of potential is immediately followed up by Frog. Episode 9 is It Takes You Away, all about a blind girl who has a portal to hell in her house. Finally, some accurate disabled representation. Okay, firstly, all the jokes about Norway being all weird and alien are way funnier than they have any right to be. The episode kinda sets itself up as more of a character-focused narrative, as Graham and Ryan have some lines and moments that tie in with their experiences and arcs for the series. Graham's still sad about his time with Grace being cut short, and Ryan's experience of his dad abandoning him affecting how he perceives the situation. When Ryan just assumed that the girl's dad had just left, I was like, oh my god, this is an actual level of consistent characterization. Again, this is the bare minimum, but the bar is so low for the series at this point that I will eat this stuff up. There's a lot going on in this episode. Some bits I really like, other bits... So there's the anti-zone with this guy called Ribbons, and I like this character a lot more than I should. He's got an over-the-top classic Who villain vibe to him, and he's just a silly guy. You couldn't trust him as far as you could throw him, but he's just a silly guy. The episode gets really interesting when the characters end up in a weird sort of mirror dimension, where dead people are still alive, including Grace. This does make for some good moments, particularly towards the end when Graham is struggling to leave her, not willing to accept that she isn't real until she disregards Ryan's safety. I really like this whole idea. It makes for some much needed character exploration. There's also the bit when the Doctor talks to this new universe, which takes the form of a frog. Like, there's a good message here of the importance of moving on and honouring the loved ones you've lost. But it's a frog. It's a fucking frog, man. So yeah, the episode has some stuff I really like. Unfortunately, the main story that surrounds it all is very dumb. So this dad abandoned his blind daughter and played fake monster sounds outside their house to scare her into staying inside. Also, he could go into the mirror universe and shag his dead wife. I feel like I don't need to explain why that is very bad parenting. How does the episode deal with this? Well, Graham and Yaz go, "Ew, that's cringe, bro." And then the episode ends with him and his daughter being all happy again, with no indication that he's even aware what he did was incredibly fucked up, or that he's learned from it. But, you know, everything is fine. He definitely doesn't have incredibly dodgy tendencies and won't put his daughter at risk again. Would you believe it? Series 11 botched its moral teachings once again. In other news, a fork was recently found in a kitchen. You know, with this and the Idiot's Lantern, Doctor Who just cannot seem to get abusive parents right. So yeah, another episode similar to Arachnids or Demons that was almost really solid, but drops the ball in a way that unfortunately brings the whole thing down. Other than that though, I think this episode has a really interesting premise, with some good exploration of grief. And I really like the concepts of the Anti-Zone and the Mirror Universe. I just wish the episode was longer so they could be expanded on more. Like the Doctor says, they only scratched the surface. There's so much more potential here. Oh well, for what it's worth, still one of the better episodes of the series. And with that, we enter the series finale. I think I'll just kill myself. Look, I've really tried to be fair with this series. I really made the effort to give credit where it's due and to point out the good bits that get overlooked when people talk about the 13th Doctor. But I genuinely consider the Battle of Rambu Av Colon a scourge on television and storytelling. It just fails to be a well-written piece of media on so many fundamental levels. So, remember the evil tooth guy from the first episode? Well, after being defeated, he teleported away. But where did he go? I mean, the Doctor claimed to send him home, but this is the same episode where this happened, so he could have ended up anywhere in this entire, incomprehensibly big universe. Well, of all the planets in the universe, and all the locations on said planets, he teleports right next to two beings with the power to control the universe with their minds, who worship a god who apparently looks exactly like him. I don't know what you expect me to say here. There have already been a couple of times in this series where the plot progressed purely by incredible coincidence, but this is genuinely just... It feels like something I would have written in a Doctor Who fanfic when I was 13. And that's not even an exaggeration. I genuinely wrote a story when I was 13 where the 12th Doctor and Nardole are on a Sontaran ship, and it turns out the original creator of the Sontarans looks exactly like Nardole, and I genuinely think that was better, more coherent writing than whatever the hell this episode has going on. Graham also has this sudden moment where he decides he wants to kill the tooth guy to avenge Grace. Graham had always been portrayed as the voice of reason up until this point, but sure, he sees an opportunity to kill the tooth guy and he wants to do it. The main problem here is the Doctor's response. Her response is, if you kill him, you're no better than him, but like, Toothboy is a genocidal tyrant who destroys entire planets, and he doesn't just kill his victims, he keeps them in stasis forever, still alive. Something the Doctor thinks, and I think we can all agree, is a fate worse than death. I can see the Doctor being against Graham killing someone out of revenge. That makes sense. Perhaps she doesn't want Graham to become a killer, as that could lead him down a dark path. That's not really how it's communicated though. She pretty much just says, hey, no, killing, don't do that. But like, killing isn't even the worst people can do, brackets destroying entire planets and leaving your victims in eternal torment, and much worse. And look, while I do think Graham's anger and desire for revenge could have been built up to a bit more, I'm not going to act like those emotions didn't exist at all in the rest of the series, particularly in the previous episode. Still feels kind of forced though. There's also this bit, where the Doctor admits her lecture to Ryan about not using guns was completely meaningless, as she doesn't even believe in the message she was pushing, and will happily use weapons against robots. Like Ryan wanted to do. The Doctor's questionable morality has been a recurring theme throughout this series, and funnily enough, ends up being the arc that gets the most attention in this finale, despite not being intentional. See, the Doctor's morality resulted in this episode. She didn't kill Tooth Guy originally, but instead tore apart his DNA, leading to him teleporting away, and subsequently using the Ux to destroy 4 planets, soon to be 5. All because of her idea that letting someone slowly and painfully die is objectively better than just killing them. This has happened a few times in this series, and the show never seemed to be aware that this mentality was a bit dodgy. But here, Tooth Guy calls out the Doctor's questionable morality, and the terrible repercussions it's had. Only for the episode to immediately shrug it off.
Every action has consequences.
These are yours, Doctor.
I didn't mean it like that.
Series 11 had one last chance to show some self-awareness. The opportunity was right there. I feel like I'm going insane. Oh no, Graham and Ryan are surrounded by sniper bots. Luckily, they can defeat them by ducking. These 2 Ux people are so devoted to this creator that they will destroy entire planets because he told them to. But the one thing that sets off alarm bells in their head is the fact that the creator knows the Doctor. Even when this episode isn't assaulting your brain cells with insultingly bad logic and storytelling, it's just boring. The pacing is just so slow, only for the ending to be rushed as hell. I could not tell you a single thing about this side character, other than his memory was erased, but he slowly remembers things over the episode. And so, we reach the ending. Graham has the opportunity to kill Tooth Guy, but refuses. What a brave and meaningful decision. That was a really impactful 40 minutes of character development there. And so, he defeats this genocidal warrior, this unstoppable tyrant who can defeat armies of trained soldiers, by shooting his foot. Genius. And once Tooth Guy is defeated, Graham and Ryan punish him by putting him in one of his own stasis chambers. A fate which, like I said, both us and the Doctor can agree is worse than death.
Left to rot? How completely obscene.
But what's her reaction when Graham tells her he's subjected Tooth Guy to a life of eternal immobile torment?
Where's Tim Shaw?
Oh, he's taking a very long nap in a very small stasis chamber.
Graham O'Brien, you're the strongest person I know.
Oh, okay. Thanks for the lesson in morality, Doctor. Apparently, I can keep people imprisoned and torture them for as long as I want, but as long as I don't kill them, it's fair game. Unless it isn't. Honestly, Series 11 is alright when it wants to be, but when it's stupid, God, it's stupid. So yeah, the Battle of Ring Doorbell single-handedly set us back as a species by about 1,000 years. There's so much it gets wrong, I don't even know where to begin. The plot is completely ridiculous and revolves around virtually impossible circumstances. The episode's discussions of morality are possibly the most ridiculous of the entire series, which is saying something. The episode is bland and uneventful at best, and offensively stupid at worst. Doctor Who finales have been letdowns before, but they at least had structure and some good ideas. You could see the potential. This finale, though, is just a mess from start to finish. There's so much stupidity, I can't wrap my head around it all. Now, I should mention that the script submitted for this episode was a first draft due to time constraints, which makes it, 5% more understandable why the episode is the way it is. Normally, each series of Doctor Who is topped off with a Christmas special, to bridge the gap between series. But for some reason I'm still unaware of, the BBC decided they wanted to scrap the Christmas specials and have New Year's Day specials instead. I have no idea why. Christmas without Doctor Who is heresy. But yeah, the first New Year's special is Resolution. But can this episode redeem Series 11 from, everything? No, not really. So first, what does this episode get right? Well, the Dalek. This episode does something new with the Daleks, and I genuinely like it. The Dalek mutant possessing people? That's cool. This episode feels like something fresh for the Daleks. I also like the idea of it being this ancient legend, so dangerous its remains are still constantly guarded over 1,000 years after being defeated. How about the rest of the episode? Does it hold up? No, not really. A big part of this episode is the sudden appearance of Ryan's dad, who's been mentioned a few times throughout the series and has clearly had a big effect on Ryan as he's grown up. Hence Ryan's incredibly nuanced personality and consistent character traits. So, what do we know about Ryan's dad? Well, after Ryan's mum died, his dad just left, abandoning his 13-year-old son, and remained distant to the point where he didn't even show up for his own mother's funeral. Oh boy, another abusive parent! This show always handles these incredibly well. Ryan and his dad go to a coffee shop to catch up, and rather than talking to the son he abandoned for years, he tries to sell his microwave oven to an employee. Then they talk, and Ryan's dad makes endless excuses for his behaviour, and doesn't apologise once, or even properly acknowledge or admit to his own wrongdoings. Instead, he makes vague statements that very much come off as excuses, and even makes snarky comments towards Ryan for his dismissive attitude.
This is about you making things right. This is how you talk to your dad.
Aaron's behaviour here is abusive and manipulative. He avoids taking proper accountability and just expects things to go back to normal now that he's suddenly back. I'm not going to act like Ryan's dad is beyond saving, or that he can't change. Of course he can, if he really tried. But that change won't happen overnight, and none of this conversation makes me believe he has any proper desire to change or make up for his past behaviour. Ryan doesn't fall for this stuff and calls him out, and rightfully so. But later on, the episode really tries to get you to sympathise with him, Graham using a flimsy comparison to try and relate to Aaron's struggle to not abandon his children.
When my mum died, my dad got rid of all her things super quick. Of course, now I realise that was his way of dealing with it.
I wish I was better at life, Graham.
There's still time.
The problem is that there just isn't enough in this episode to justify this sudden wave of sympathy he receives. And then, at the end, Ryan's dad is about to die, and the only way to save him is for Ryan to say he forgives him. This is portrayed as some heartwarming, heroic moment, and just f*** off, man. This is not okay. This is an awful message to send. Doesn't matter if your parents are shit people who abandoned you and refuse to take proper accountability for their behaviour, it's your responsibility to forgive them and move on. If your parents are bad people who weren't there for you, you don't owe them shit. Once again, Ryan's dad could absolutely change for the better, but we simply haven't seen enough proof that he can or will, and doesn't deserve proper forgiveness in the meantime. This resolution, is quite similar to the ending of The Idiot's Lantern, where Tommy is encouraged to go off with his abusive dad, despite his dad literally just being thrown out of the house for being a terrible husband and dad, and not having any time to prove that he will even try to change. It's such a shitty message to send, and I hate how Doctor Who keeps doing this. Twice in one series as well. I want to talk about an episode of the Doctor Who spin-off show The Sarah Jane Adventures that gets this topic right. This episode is The Mark of the Berserker. In this episode, Clyde's dad suddenly returns, having abandoned Clyde when he was younger than Ryan was, after having an affair with his wife's sister. It's pretty clear from the off that he is not a good guy, feeling a massive level of disconnect from his son, surprised that Clyde turned out so differently from him. This is shown with lines like how he apparently likes to befriend people who will be perceived as less cool than him and make him look better, and he assumes that's the only reason Clyde is friends with Luke. Clyde also makes it clear how much his dad's absence affected him growing up, affecting his relationship with his mum, resulting in him misbehaving at school and getting expelled. Had it not been for him meeting Sarah Jane's group, who knows where he could have ended up. And then his dad gets possessed by an alien artifact and becomes the main villain of the episode. But the important thing is that he isn't magically forgiven by the end, because he doesn't deserve it, and neither does Ryan's dad. What else happens? The episode kills off Unit, one of the most iconic, long-lasting aspects of the entire show, because of Brexit, I think.
Oh, you're good, Ryan's dad. You're almost making up for your parenting deficit.
This is sarcasm, right? I really hope this is sarcasm.
Everything's gone off. No Wi-Fi, no phone signal, it's all down.
What do we do?
Suppose we'll have to have a conversation.
What?
Starting a suicide pact in honour of this scene, who wants to join? So, that's resolution. I like all the Dalek stuff. It handles the concept of a lone Dalek rebuilding itself and taking down entire armies without just feeling like a rehash of Dalek back in Series 1. Unfortunately, the character side of things really lets this episode down, as all the stuff with Ryan's dad is very poorly written and pushes yet another insensitive and genuinely harmful message. There's a level of competent storytelling which puts it a step above the previous episode, but I'm just not a fan. Honestly, I would consider Series 11 the weakest series of Doctor Who. There's a lot this series gets wrong, and not a lot it gets right. Pretty much every episode contains at least one dodgy moment or scene that is just so bizarre that it brings down the rest of the episode as a result. Which is a shame, because episodes like Demons of the Punjab and It Takes You Away were so close to being consistently good. Almost every episode contains something that's just indefensibly stupid. Be it the Doctor's meaningless lecture to Ryan about guns, the entirety of Rosa, the Doctor's incredibly questionable morality in Arachnids in the UK and Kerblam, the Thajarian twist in Demons of the Punjab, the lack of consequence for the dad in It Takes You Away, gestures vaguely. Another thing that massively brings this series as a whole down is its morals. I swear to God, almost every episode just completely botches its morals in the most nonsensical way. As I said, the Ghost Monument has that scene where the Doctor seemingly read on TARDIS Wiki that she doesn't like guns and wanted to insert that trait into her characterization, teaching Ryan a contradictory message that she confirms later on she doesn't even believe in. Rosa as a whole is just... why? The plot of the episode actively detracts from the original story it's meant to be championing, massively diminishing the efforts made by people of colour in the 1950s, chalking up the social revolution of the civil rights movement to coincidence. Arachnids in the UK is one of many times in this series where the Doctor's morality is portrayed as objectively right by the show, despite her morals being pretty shaky, and the show often oversimplifies the nuanced moral debates it clearly wants you to pay attention to. Kerblam does the same thing, but also completely abandons the Doctor's core trait of anti-establishmentism, as she defends the blatant labour exploitation of Space Amazon, as well as justifying the Kerblam system's completely unnecessary act of killing an innocent person. It Takes You Away barely acknowledges how f***ed up it is for this guy to abandon his blind daughter, keeping her in constant fear over a monster that doesn't exist, also he can bang his dead wife. There is no indication that he's learned his lesson by the end, so we just have to hope he doesn't do that again, even though his daughter outright says he's mentally unwell. Something that isn't just gonna be fixed in the blink of an eye. And as I've already said, the Battle of Kang and Kolos manages to mess up every aspect of the story it's trying to tell in a complete disaster of a finale that's more impressive than anything. And to top it all off, Resolution poorly handles the topic of abusive parents, telling a half-baked story of forgiveness without giving the audience a valid reason to sympathise with or root for the character of Ryan's dad, forcing the responsibility of forgiveness on Ryan. The show's moral compass has become more skewed than ever, the messages pushed being ignorant and overly simplistic at best, and downright insulting and harmful at worst. The characterization of the main cast leaves a lot to be desired as well. I've already gone through the 13th Doctor's dodgy morals throughout the series, but even with that aside, her overall character is pretty strange. The first episode hints at her being more tech and gadget focused than other Doctors, similar to the third Doctor, only for that trait to never really come up for the rest of the series. She's also very anxious and self-conscious. She'll openly admit multiple times to being nervous over circumstances she deals with on a daily basis, like aliens doing bad things. She's also worried how she comes off, seeming genuinely embarrassed and flustered at times. Whenever she does make a dramatic speech that shows confidence and bravado, it's immediately undercut by a desire for approval, or a moment of awkwardness that undercuts the dramatic tension. It's just strange and a stark contrast from the confident and outgoing Doctor we knew previously. The companions aren't great either. Yaz likes to talk to people and help them, and that's about it. Ryan and Graham almost have an interesting dynamic and arc. The pieces are literally right there, but the show does nothing with them. I couldn't tell you a single consistent trait about Ryan, other than he sometimes has dyspraxia, and doesn't trust or forgive his dad, until he suddenly does with no build-up. On the rare occasion that he does show signs of a character, his traits are inconsistent and never get expanded on. Graham definitely feels like the most fleshed out of them all, having a wise, grandfatherly presence, until he suddenly becomes an acrimonious madman hellbent on revenge in the finale. Alright, I've dogpiled on this series for long enough. What does it get right? Well, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, Demons of the Punjab, and It Takes You Away are actually pretty good with interesting concepts. And The Witchfinders is genuinely a great episode that I think is very underrated, a real diamond in the rough. What else? We stan ribbons. So yeah, in case you need it, allow me to spell out exactly what I'm thinking in obnoxious detail. I am not a big Series 11 fan. That's not an opinion I want to have. I want to enjoy this show, but the series gets too much wrong for me to defend it. It's a shame, really. Series 11 was marketed as a fresh start for the show, and was genuinely the best jumping on point the show has ever had since Series 1. There could have been such an influx of fresh ideas and a new direction for the show, but everything just kinda fell flat, and there's just a lot of wasted potential. Like I said, Series 11 seemed like a real fresh start for the show, all the villains being new, except the Daleks, and almost no callbacks to the show's past. Series 12 completely abandons that though, as it's filled with callbacks, returning villains, and massive lore changes, in what's quite a stark contrast to the relatively laid-back and simplistic Series 11. I do think this new direction makes Series 12 more engaging than Series 11, and I do definitely consider it an improvement overall, but we'll get to this. Series 12 begins with Spyfall, the 13th Doctor's first two-part story, which goes for a James Bond-style action thriller spy crime fiction adventure suspense type story. To be honest, I'm surprised it took this long for the show to do a James Bond crossover. Think about it, an iconic British fictional character who fights bad guys, and is portrayed by a different actor every few years. I'm surprised they haven't confirmed James Bond as a Time Lord already. The Bachelor.
Is this wash bag yours?
Yes, I'm so clumsy. My sister's always having a go at me for this.
Now, it's pretty obvious this person is some kind of undercover spy, but it says a lot about the dialogue in the Chibnall era so far that I was genuinely prepared to dismiss them as just an ordinary person with the usual clunky, awkward lines I've come to expect. Okay, no, to be fair, this episode gets off to a good start. First, we see what all the main characters have been up to. Yaz struggling to balance her work and travelling, Graham still having regular checkups for his cancer, Ryan playing basketball with his mates, and the Doctor doing some DIY with the TARDIS. All this stuff fits with what we know about their characters, and aside from one or two clunky lines, I like this introduction. It reminds me of The Impossible Astronaut. It does seem like there's more of a clear direction with the main cast this time around, all of them having arcs or recurring themes that are set up in this opening. There's also little stuff like this back and forth between There's also little stuff like this back and forth between Graham and Ryan that breathes so much more life into this scene and the dynamic.
I always wanted to be a spy.
You'd be a rubbish spy.
I'd be a great spy.
Every line can really change a whole scene, for better or for worse, and that's something I'd never really considered before the Chibnall era. We also get a cameo from Stephen Fry, who was planned to write a Doctor Who episode in Series 2, but time and budget constraints meant it never happened. His appearance in Doctor Who was announced with a special video on the show's social media. A very special video indeed. I feel like now is a better time than ever to bring up the marketing the show received during the Chibnall era. It was basically non-existent, and when it did exist, let's just say it didn't drum up much hype. Like, what is this, man? Everything about this, the weird lighting, the click sound, the generic text awkwardly zooming in, you could have bought a Twix with the show's marketing budget 5 years ago. They were also weirdly secretive. Series 13 featured John Bishop as one of the main cast, and he got in trouble before the series aired because he confirmed in a Q&A on Zoom that his character was from Liverpool. John Bishop got in trouble because he said his character was a Scouser. Anyway, Lenny Henry is also in this episode, who actually played the Doctor in a parody sketch back in the 80s.
Now, it looks like the proto-anodizing discorporators have short-circuited the molecular quark overload.
Is that difficult to fix?
No, but it's very difficult to say.
He plays the main villain, a billionaire CEO of Vor, a massive search engine.
Vor is more powerful than most nations.
This is true, actually. Trump in particular was really worried about it. Google Donald Trump Vor to find out more. So yeah, Stephen Fry gets assassinated and the walls start moving. The gang get attacked by these things, and whatever they are, they can enter the TARDIS, something even the Doctor is shocked about. The TARDIS is normally portrayed as this safe haven, nothing bad could possibly happen in there, so the fact that these things can just climb inside immediately establishes them as powerful and scary. There's a lot of weird and creepy imagery involving these light guys, and I really like it. Their whole presence is just ethereal, but like, in an evil way. There's also that bit where Yaz gets sent to that nowhere place. Like, yeah, I do not understand these guys, and I love that. There's also the mandatory James Bond casino and motorcycle chase scenes. They had to happen, and yeah, they're good. There's also O, a former MI6 agent who the Doctor met once, but has kept in touch with. Spoiler alert, O is the Master, but I love the idea of the Doctor and the Master casually messaging while he was guarding her in the vault for decades. The Master reveal goes hard, especially since he's been playing the long game to the point where he met the Doctor in the past and built up an established connection and trust. He also stims when he's excited, which is a mood. Now, I love Sacha Dhawan's Master. He's easily one of my favourite things about the 13th Doctor era. But I feel like I need to talk about the character of the Master at this point in the show. Firstly, I think they were a little too keen to bring the Master back, seeing as Missy's arc only concluded just over one series ago, and was a pretty conclusive end for the character. I'm not saying they never should have brought the Master back, but Moffat waited a good while before bringing them back after the end of time, and that worked well, making Missy's reveal all the more impactful. Here, on the other hand, it's just kind of like, oh, the Master is back. Sure, I guess. I'll never say no to more Master, but there's nothing wrong with letting a character rest for a little while. Also, the last time we saw this character, she'd undergone this fantastic arc of changing and learning to be good, fighting the chains of her past and growing, starting to restore her connection with her oldest friend in the universe, only to die as soon as she decides to do the right thing. Without hope, without witness, without reward. It was a beautifully tragic end for the character, one of my favourite arcs in the entire show. But here, the Master comes back and he's just suddenly evil again. Like nothing happened. And look, I get it. The Master turning good wouldn't make them a sustainable character long term. But even if they were to undo Missy's arc, there were surely better ways than to just pretend it never happened. Now, there's never any actual confirmation in the show that the Spy Master is after Missy in the Master's timeline. So you can headcanon him as pre-Missy, like I do. I know some people don't like that headcanon, and listen, if it turns out Missy survived and they gave us some tragic story where the Master reverts to their evil ways, I will happily join you guys. But in the meantime, Missy is still the final Master. Argue with the Wall Princess. But yeah, I consider Spyfall Part 1 a pretty great series opener, all things considered. The Doctor's companions have more to do, and they actually seem to have more personality and things to react to, which is a great improvement. I like the bad guys, they're really intriguing and ominous. The Master has a great reveal, and I just love the whole spy James Bond stuff. It really adds a lot to the episode and makes it stand out. Series 12 is off to a pretty good start. Oh, never mind. Okay, no, Part 2 starts out strong as well. Graham, Yaz, and Ryan are saved from the plane crash by the Doctor in the future, planting secret messages and a hidden video on their plane. This kind of reminds me of the Big Bang, the Doctor seemingly having everything under control, which contrasts with her current situation of being completely helpless. Like, yeah, she's gonna be alright, obviously, but how does she get to that point where she is now? Stuck in this weird place with a Victorian-looking woman who thinks of the Bright Boys as guardian angels. Like, there's still a lot of mystery going on. So, the Doctor ends up in the 19th century, and the Master shows up.
When I kill them, Doctor, it gives me a little buzz. It's like knowing I'm in the right place, doing what I was made for.
I'm gonna be honest, these lines from the Master would be soul-crushing if they acknowledged the events of the Doctor Falls at all here. These two are constantly trying to remain one step ahead of each other, gaining any leverage they can. But what the fuck is this?
Call me by my name.
Master.
Beg your pardon.
Master.
Can't hear you, love.
Master.
The other three are back in England and have been made into wanted criminals. Yaz immediately chooses to phone her mum, letting her heart rule her head, and trying to explain and comfort the people she knows. Oh my god, a consistent character trait! Also, this episode would have been an immediate 10 out of 10 if Graham, or literally anyone, said the chase is on here, but never mind. They also realise they know hardly anything about the Doctor, and this seems like setup for a recurring narrative. As we discover in this series, the Doctor barely knows anything about herself, so there's a good connection to be made there. The Doctor and the Master have a bit of a chase themselves, as he chases her through time, eventually to Paris in 1943. There's this bit where they communicate with Morse code, mimicking the 4 knocks that plagued the Master for so long. 4 dots actually translates in Morse code to the letter H, so they're basically saying HH to each other here. To find the Doctor, the Master has infiltrated the ranks of the bad guys from World War II, whose name I cannot say on YouTube. But wait a minute, he's not white. Why aren't they, being racist? Well, here, he's using a perception filter that makes him look white. This is a surprise tool that will help us later. The Doctor defeats the Master by making the World War II bad guys believe he's a double agent, and there are already soldiers coming up to arrest him. But then, the Doctor disables his perception filter, and as she disables the filter, she says,
"Now they'll see the real you."
Bear in mind, this is completely unprompted and completely unnecessary. The Doctor weaponized someone's skin color to make them face a harsher punishment from one of the most ruthless, evil, and horrific groups in human history. That is genuinely so sickening and so far from the character of the Doctor that I cannot believe it really happened. I outright refuse to believe nobody in front of or behind the camera at any point looked at the script or how the episode was panning out and thought, maybe this wouldn't look good. Things were going so well too. I was really enjoying this series opener. I thought things were getting back on track. But no, the 13th Doctor's awful morality strikes again, and we just accept this fact and move on like nothing happened. I've seen people try and defend this scene or explain it as a communication error or something, but I don't see how you could interpret this any differently without doing some insane mental gymnastics. You know, it's funny. You constantly see people who, to be frank, have never actually watched the 13th Doctor, who complain about the overabundance of left-wing ideology in this period of the show. But like, what about this screams left-wing to you? How about the message of Kerblam? Genuinely, point me to the extreme left-wing stuff being forced down your throat. Please, I need refreshment. So yeah, that scene left a really bad taste in my mouth. But now it's time for the CEO of Vor to be defeated, which is a sentence I can't quite believe I just said. And given how the Doctor just dealt with one POC villain, I'm really worried how she'll go about defeating the other one. Okay, no, he just sort of walks away and we'd never really know what happened to him. Which I guess is an improvement, but the episode has one final reveal. Gallifrey was destroyed. Yeah, it's a tragic moment, and makes you wonder what was so bad that the Master of all people killed his race and home. But it feels a little redundant. After the events of Hellbent, Moffat left Gallifrey kind of open. It was back, and it was sort of just chilling there for any future showrunner to pick it up if they felt like it. So Chibnall picked it up and destroyed it again. I mean, yeah, he can do that if he wants, but we've already gone through the whole Gallifrey was destroyed thing. To bring it back and immediately destroy it again is definitely a choice. Also, I would love to know how the Master managed to destroy Gallifrey when a billion Daleks couldn't manage it during an endless war, with horrifying weapons and creations beyond our comprehension. The first half of Spyfall Part 2 is great. It manages to keep the momentum of the first part while taking things in a different direction. Unfortunately, the episode falls apart the moment the Doctor does this. It's really sad. Like, for a moment, I genuinely thought we were beyond the dodgy morals of Series 11. But nope. Spyfall Part 2 unfortunately suffers from this scene, as well as a pretty rushed ending, and a reveal that I find more repetitive than intriguing. Oh well, on to episode 3. Actually, never mind. I'm just gonna go kill myself again. Orphan 55 is another episode that's been ripped to shreds many times. It's up there with the Battle of Ranskoor Tollbooth in terms of how it fundamentally fails to tell a competent story. Now first, I'm going to focus on a part of this episode that I never really see people discuss. Probably because there's not much to say, and what there is to say feels incredibly stupid. So this woman wants to blow up the holiday resort thing, because her mum is in charge of it, which is treated like some shocking twist despite there being no clues or reason for this twist whatsoever. And she's blowing up the resort because her mum never showed up to her birthday parties. I swear to God I'm not making this up. But then, the mum says, after pulling a gun on her own daughter, that she made this place to give to her. And then they forgive each other and maybe die at the end. I don't know, it's such a weird plot thread, I think I'm too confused to take offense. The side characters in this episode are just beyond stupid. I could not tell you a single character trait about any of them. There's the obvious Billy that's been memed to death already. Then there's this character, who I probably wouldn't remember existed if he wasn't played by Jay from The Inbetweeners.
Bus wankers! Why are you slowing down? I tried to say!
Listen, hey, sorry, I'm really sorry,
Who's a wanker?
Please, I'm sorry,
I'm a
really,
wanker,
really
man.
sorry. I'm really sorry.
These characters are all so bland, and they all make stupid decisions and willingly kill themselves for no reason. The plot is just so poorly structured, it feels like the episode just has a checklist of things it needs to cross off one by one. Then there's the message of the episode. The planet of Orphan 55 is Earth in the future. Wow, what an incredibly original twist. Not even Doctor Who itself has ever done this before. The Earth was killed by climate change, and in case you couldn't work that out, the episode really hits you on the head with it. Again, and again. So yeah, if you need a refresher, climate change is actually pretty bad. But what can we do about it? Surely the episode can provide specific examples or advice for what we can do, rather than just saying, hey, let's not let this happen. Right?
Unless people face facts and change, catastrophe is coming.
The problem here is that this message is incredibly surface level and incredibly repetitive. It feels like it was made for very young children who are just learning what climate change is for the first time. But as a Gen Z, climate change has been a big recurring threat we've been hearing about for as long as we can remember. We already know this. Everyone over the age of 6 already knows this. An episode that discusses a similar topic and gets it right is The Poison Sky. This episode contains commentary on carbon emissions and how they're destroying the atmosphere, but also tells us what we can do to help. You can walk, you can ride a bike. Obviously that won't be viable all the time, but cutting down your car usage when possible can make a difference. Orphan 55 just says change without elaborating on what that change could or should entail. It's a good Keir Starmer impression, but not a sufficient way to push your message. So yeah, I'd like to not talk about this episode anymore, please. Episode 4 is Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror, which, despite its awful name, is alright. It's not a major standout episode, but there's not really much wrong with it, so it's a much needed palate cleanser. This episode, believe it or not, is about Nikola Tesla, an early 20th century inventor who had ideas for plenty of things that are a massive part of our everyday lives nowadays, but he didn't receive any recognition for these inventions, and died penniless and forgotten. Again, I like this era's thing of bringing attention to figures or events in history that are often glossed over. Though I will admit, the way Tesla and Edison are portrayed and treated in this episode is pretty surface level. Tesla shares an idea he had, and they all go, wow, this product was your idea? I love this product! Meanwhile, Edison's portrayal is very greedy. He just says, this thing would make me money, and they all go, ew, cringe. The bad guys here are the Skithra, alien scorpions whose whole thing is they steal from other races. The queen is played by Rani from the Sarah Jane Adventures, and a lot of people have called this whole character a poor man's Ragnos, and I'm kinda inclined to agree. The whole stealing thing could be seen as a parallel to how Edison allegedly stole Tesla's ideas, but the thing is, there's no actual historical evidence of that happening. The Doctor and the Skithra Queen have a pretty good interaction at the end, where the Doctor becomes surprisingly cruel. Perhaps she's going down a darker path out of grief and frustration. I say going down. Yeah, I don't have all that much to say about this episode. It's just pretty good. I like the set design, and the dialogue is better than most other 13th Doctor episodes. Fugitive of the Judoon is an interesting one. A lot of things happen, and for the most part, I think I like it. So first, we're introduced to Ruth, and her characterization is way too strong for a 13th Doctor episode. She has to be important. The first scene in the TARDIS feels kinda awkward. The Doctor's companions basically give exposition dumps to explain to us how the Doctor has been behaving recently, rather than us inferring this ourselves. This feels awkward. The episode feels the need to explain that the Doctor is currently having a character arc. We just don't get to actually see it in the wild. So, this episode brings back the Judoon, space police rhinos who first appeared in the Series 3 episode Smith and Jones. And this episode retreads a lot of the plot beats from that episode. There are a couple of things here that I can look past.
A platoon of Judoon near the moon.
Judoon platoon upon the moon.
Like, it's just a little reference to their first appearance. Fine. But then there are the scenes of the Judoon detecting the language and shooting someone for assaulting them. Fugitive basically does what Smith and Jones did, but stupider. This Judoon scans a voice print and declares the language as
human.
But like, what?
Language assimilated. Designation Earth English.
The fact that they took the exact same scene but changed the dialogue to sound stupider is an actual sign of plagiarism. I'm getting H-Bomber Guy flashbacks. There's also this bit where they shoot this guy after he shoves one of them for knocking over some cups. This guy is a literal caricature, making a dossier all about some guy because he wants the guy's wife. It's just hard to take seriously, especially since the original scene being parodied here is so much better. This guy is scared and attacks a Judoon out of fear. It adds to their threat level and shows their zero-tolerance attitude. Fugitive just doesn't do that here, and it's a shame because the last scene saw the Judoon shoot an old woman who was trying to run away in fear, and that was fine. So far, the handling of the Judoon feels more like a retread than anything. And on that note, it's time for The Sarah Jane Adventures Did This But Better Round 2. Prisoner of the Judoon sees an alien fugitive loose on Earth after a Judoon spaceship crashes. This episode doesn't just redo Smith and Jones, things feel different. The Judoon is definitely used more for comic relief this time around, but it's a kids' show, I can accept that. Also, this scene is objectively hilarious.
Noise exceeds permitted levels. Turn down. Have nice day.
Ma'am?
The Doctor does give the Judoon a good dressing down for their weapons and killing. Last time, the Doctor was at risk of being killed as a fugitive, but she can take more control this time around, and I like this different direction. The way this episode handles its mysteries is also good. I like the way the mystery of Ruth builds up over time. Her husband being a red herring was a bit on the nose, but there's still a lot of intrigue around him when this person teleports in, and it really does seem like these two have history. The B-plot of this episode involves Graham, Yaz and Ryan being teleported up to a ship, where they meet Captain Jack, who last appeared in the show 10 years ago. This is a good surprise. That's about it though. Yeah, Jack doesn't really do a lot here, he literally just exists to give some pretty forced foreshadowing about the series finale. What a great way to bring back this fan-favourite character. Okay, what I'm about to say is completely stolen from Harbo Wilms. He used this exact analogy in one of his videos, but it's a good analogy so I'm using it here. This is like if Sarah Jane suddenly showed up in the Lazarus Experiment and told Martha, "Don't trust that Mr. Saxon guy, he's up to something," and immediately left. It just feels like a waste, especially since the usually energetic Jack is reduced to the classic Chibnall trope of characters all standing still delivering generic dialogue. But man, credit where it's due, this reveal goes so hard. Turns out Ruth was the Doctor in disguise, another Series 3 callback. Now, there is something here that could very easily be construed as a plot hole. The fugitive Doctor's TARDIS still looks like a police box. This doesn't make sense because we eventually find out this is an earlier incarnation of the Doctor, before the first Doctor, and we saw the TARDIS get stuck as a police box in the second part of the very first story back in 1963. So if she's before the first Doctor, how is the TARDIS already stuck looking like this? Well, perhaps the TARDIS just likes this look. We already know the Doctor stole a faulty TARDIS. That will have been why it was being repaired when the Doctor took it. The chameleon circuit was already broken. I mean, this reveal wouldn't work if the TARDIS didn't look like a police box already, and a big flaw of mine is that I'm always willing to suspend my disbelief if I think a reveal is cool. So the fugitive Doctor comes from the past, where the Doctor was in some sort of alien organization, and was clearly pretty violent. This is a major lore revelation, and very interesting.
The Judoon have got us in a tractor beam, dragging us on board their ship.
Yeah, no, thanks, I have eyes, I can see that. I don't know why the show suddenly decides to do audio description, it really takes me out of it. Especially since the Doctor literally just said,
"She's here."
Which was fine on its own.
What are you talking about?
How's that possible?
Why do they all just ask generic questions one at a time? It's so awkward. Fugitive of the Judoon is a mixed bag. On one hand, there's a good mystery here, with some nice surprising twists. But there is a bit of a style over substance thing going on here. There's some good intrigue here, but that's the thing. Intrigue is all this episode has going for it. It purely relies on the fact that these mysteries will be solved soon to invest you. Since this episode has a callback to Series 3's Human Nature and the Family of Blood, I'll use that as a comparison. This two-parter sees the Doctor use a Time Lord fobwatch thing to rewrite his DNA and turn him into a human. The story is already brilliant on its own, but it retroactively gets given even more value in the series finale, when we meet another character who has the same fobwatch. Human Nature and the Family of Blood are technically set up for the series finale, but they still tell a fantastic story on their own. Like, imagine if at the end the Doctor just went, "This fobwatch is very powerful. I sure hope we don't run into anyone else who owns one." And that was the whole episode. Pretty much the whole plot of Fugitive of the Judoon relies on the fact that these mysteries will be solved later. Same with the Jack cameo, he literally just exists to foreshadow the series finale. And again, I refuse to spend more than 5 seconds on this episode. Can You Hear Me is an interesting episode. This one tackles mental health and how it's important to be open about your struggles with those you trust. My favourite part was when that moral was extended into the episode's ending. That bit was great. First, we get a look into the lives of the 3 companions. This is fine for what it is, but it's the kind of character development you'd expect early on in their time in the show. We are 18 episodes into the era at this point, so it's a little overdue, but the episode does a good job with the little it has to work with. The Doctor also goes off on an adventure on her own, and keeps talking as if her friends are still there. This would be fine if Yaz didn't give this exposition dump a couple of episodes ago.
Is that where you go? When you leave us to explore and you say you'll be back in an hour, but you never are. Where do you go?
Like, I thought she was on her own a lot nowadays. Why is she behaving as if she's not used to being alone? This episode is meant to be more of a character piece, which would be great if these characters had consistent traits and development over the last 2 series. There are some nightmare scenes which I think are pretty cool. Everyone has nightmares that feed into their worst fears. Graham with his cancer and guilt over Grace, Ryan losing his friends and all the fighting and monsters affecting him mentally, and Yaz having a sense of dissatisfaction, with dialogue that alludes to her dealing with suicidal thoughts in the past. All this is really interesting. I just wish this episode happened in Series 11. This is some much needed character development that unfortunately comes too late in the show to hit the way it could. These nightmare scenes are great, even if they do remind me that Orphan 55 did in fact happen. Also, Graham has to connect with the TARDIS telepathically, but he doesn't finger the TARDIS. Yeah, this show fell off, man. The villain of this episode is Zelin, an Eternal who I think is a pretty interesting character. The Eternals have appeared in the show before, immortal beings who just like to mess with other people to pass the time. And Zelin is actually intimidating. You can tell he thrives on fear and chaos. You could almost see him as a precursor to the Pantheon of Discord, although the Eternals and the Pantheon are 2 different things. The Doctor and Zelin are constantly trying to one-up each other, and it's not often you see someone who can really give the Doctor a run for their money. Anyway, there's also this character called Tahira, who does literally nothing for the whole episode, has character development and overcomes her fears off-screen, and shows up at the end and defeats the bad guys. So this episode pretty clearly sends a message that it's important to talk to others about your mental health. If you're dealing with fears or worries or anything, talk to people you trust. Good message, I agree. Now let's see if the episode can practice what it preaches. At the end, Graham is opening up to the Doctor about his fears. He still worries about his cancer and looks to her for reassurance. How does she respond?
I should say a reassuring thing now, shouldn't I?
Yeah, probably.
I'm still quite socially awkward, so I'm just going to subtly walk towards the console. In a minute, I'll think of something that I should have said that might have been helpful.
Okay, no, fuck off. You cannot have just spent the last 5 minutes lecturing us on how important it is to talk to people and then do this for a laugh. Not only does this completely undermine the whole message the episode was trying to push, but that's just not how the Doctor would behave. Yes, the Doctor can be a bit socially inept at times, and they may come off as insensitive, but they will always try to be reassuring. Vincent and the Doctor is a perfect example of this topic done right. The Doctor genuinely comforts Amy, who believes they didn't cure Vincent's depression at all. He gives a great metaphor for life and how there will always be good things to combat the bad things. It's a genuine, heartfelt ending to an episode that carefully and accurately discusses depression and mental health. Can You Hear Me completely forgets its message for a cheap, unfunny joke that just makes the 13th Doctor seem like even more of a dick than before. Visually, this episode is a standout. There's plenty of unique and creepy stuff, I like Zelin, and the show finally explores these characters and their backstories in an interesting way. The ending is where this episode really lets itself down, as the final 10 minutes are devoted to a pretty on-the-nose discussion of mental health, only for the final scene to completely undo all of that with a very poor taste moment that lowers my estimations of the 13th Doctor even more. What surprises me about this is that Chris Chibnall is a cancer survivor himself, and he wrote the Doctor this way because people behaved that way when he told them about his cancer. Like, yeah, that's your experience, fair enough, but surely you'd take this opportunity to encourage more open discussion about the topic? Or at the very least, don't let your compassionate, helpful protagonist be the inept, ignorant one. I don't know, this episode is alright for the most part. I just wish we got more of Zelin and the other one. Alright, we are so fucking back. The Haunting of Villa Diodati is a great episode. Like the Witchfinders, it's a real showcase of what the Chibnall era could be. Fun fact, this was also the last episode to not be written or co-written by one of the 3 New Who showrunners until Rogue in Series 14. Over 4 years later. That's depressing. The episode starts out with all the side characters, and oh my god, there's actual characterization here. The characters have nuanced relationships, they have witty back and forths. We're already learning about them as people. I'm invested. Lord Byron is easily my favourite of the side characters. He doesn't just state his character traits, we learn about him through his regular dialogue and actions. And dare I say, He has incredible riz.
Reminders that we tread on the dust of empires. Crops now grow where blood was spilt. An innocent fascination, I assure you.
When we do learn about characters, the exposition is done in a clean way, and it feels nowhere near as forced as I've come to expect. It's also really impressive that this episode manages to properly flesh out and balance 5 side characters in only 45 minutes. Even Ryan, with his inconsistent character traits, seems to meet a healthy middle in this episode, or about as healthy as you can realistically get. His overconfidence seen in the Ghost Monument blending with his more timid nature in this scene.
You're the one who looks like death.
I'm in rude health.
Whatever you say, mate.
Did I say choose, sir?
What?
He's challenging you to a duel.
Look, I'm not here to fight anyone, alright? So everyone just calm down.
Eventually, the lone Cyberman shows up, an unfinished Cyberman who never completed conversion, so he still feels emotions. I'll talk more about him in a bit, but for now, I'm going to focus on his interaction with the Doctor. They have such an interesting dynamic, both trying to one-up each other while getting a feel for how powerful the other is. The lone Cyberman is clearly quite emotional, and this is communicated smoothly to the audience, rather than another character just expositing this information. That'd be ridiculous. Right, we learn a lot about the lone Cyberman here, mainly through the Doctor's observations. There's a level of snarkiness and confidence that I feel has been kinda lacking from the 13th Doctor up until this point. Her bravado in this scene isn't undercut with a joke or a moment of self-consciousness. There is a level of humour, but at the expense of the villain rather than the Doctor, as she deliberately provokes him.
Who's never going to be under there?
You're not as primitive as I expected.
You're not as cyborgy as I expected. What happened? They get bored halfway through or something? Bit embarrassing.
You irritate me.
How very human. Still feel things then?
I love this scene, man.
Because sometimes this team structure isn't flat. It's mountainous, with me at the summit, in the stratosphere, alone.
Oh my god, the Doctor clashing with her companions, how I missed you. The Doctor has the choice to sacrifice Percy Bysshe Shelley, massively affecting the future, or letting the lone Cyberman take the Cyberium, also massively affecting the future. It's a moral dilemma, and one the episode handles well. Like the Doctor says,
sometimes even I can't win.
Neither option here is particularly good, and this take on morality is such a breath of fresh air, as opposed to previous episodes making one choice seem completely fine and morally right.
Cyberium, it's leaving his body.
Yeah, no thanks, I have eyes, I can tell.
I'll drop you back in 2020.
Okay, now that COVID is canon in the show, this line officially makes 13 the most evil Doctor ever. Well, consider me hyped for the rest of the series finale. Surely nothing can go wrong. Right, I struggle to find things I dislike about The Haunting of Villa Diodati. I think in terms of characters, plot, and morality, this episode is the strongest of the whole era thus far. I think the characters, both main and side, are very well written, and the show balances its large cast with its runtime really well. The general dialogue in this episode is a massive improvement, characters communicating their motivations and personalities smoothly and naturally, rather than the typical exposition dumps that plague the 13th Doctor's tenure. The lone Cyberman is introduced in an exciting and threatening way, with some great interactions with the Doctor, who feels a lot more like the Doctor used to this time around. Easily my favourite 13th Doctor episode so far, maybe overall. Ascension of the Cybermen starts with a montage of this couple adopting a baby and watching him grow up, which is a sweet opening, and does build intrigue as to how this connects to Rusty Bloke. It's a very Moffat-y thing, ending on a cliffhanger and then starting the next part in a completely unrelated location. So, the Doctor finds where they need to go, and informs the others that the Cybermen managed to reduce the human population to 7. And their reactions are very fitting. This reveal is truly given the weight and reaction it deserves.
7 humans left?
I don't know what to say about the first half of this episode, really. It's got your usual pretty bland characters who give generic exposition. The gang also get split up in some pretty forced way, but things get really disappointing when the Doctor finally talks to the lone Cyberman. She pauses the plot to explain his character to him. This is kind of redundant on its own, but it sucks even more given the interactions between these two we got last episode. This explanation of the lone Cyberman's emotions was done naturally as the Doctor taunted him. It wasn't a forced exposition dump, it quickly and efficiently told us what the lone Cyberman is all about, while establishing an interesting dynamic between him and the Doctor, only for the next episode to completely forget about that dynamic and go back to spelling things out for the audience. It really is a shame seeing all that potential get squandered as the Chibnall era goes back to the status quo. Also, I want to talk about the concept of the lone Cyberman in general. I was going to talk about this during the last episode, but I didn't want to ruin a moment of me being unequivocally positive about a 13th Doctor episode. I like the whole partially converted Cyberman struggling with identity thing. It's like Cyberwoman, but without whoever thought this was a good design. But the lone Cyberman's character basically ends at Cyberman with emotions. But he's still evil. It honestly feels like a less interesting version of Mr. Clever from Nightmare in Silver. I still don't fully get why a cyberplanner is so emotional and camp, but it provides some good character drama and Matt Smith plays the double role brilliantly. We also kinda had a similar concept with Dalek back in Series 1 as well, although once again, that was more interesting, as the Dalek was really struggling with its emotions, and the episode once again created some good character drama out of it, which this series finale just lacks. I like the lone Cyberman as a concept, I just wish more was done with him, rather than just, he's evil, but he still gets horny. So Graham, Yaz, and this week's planks of wood are stuck drifting through space, and would you believe it, they drift into a field filled with Cyberman parts and a big Cyberman ship. Now, this is nowhere near as bad as the previous series finale, like, they were already near the location of a cyber war, but this still feels a little too convenient.
Carrying a Cyberman that makes other Cybermen scream.
Yeah, no thanks, I have ears, I can tell. The most interesting thing about this episode is the occasional cuts we get to the adopted child we saw at the start, as he grows up, becomes a police officer, gets shot and falls off a cliff, and survives. I mean, we all already know what this is foreshadowing, but I like these segments. They add a lot of intrigue, and I found myself getting surprisingly invested in them and wondering how they'd connect to the rest of the story. Anyway, the Doctor opens a portal, the Master comes through and delivers a line for all the trailers, and that's it. Honestly, I think Ascension of the Cybermen had potential, especially after the brilliant setup of the previous episode, but what we got was kinda bland. There's side characters that I just don't care for, any potential involving the lone Cyberman is squashed. It feels like things just happen because they need to, all topped off with generic exposition and obvious things being spelled out. Like I said, the highlight was the story of this Irish boy growing up. I really enjoyed those bits. Overall, not offensively bad, just kinda uneventful. Okay, I've edged you for long enough. It's time for The Timeless Children, the episode that shook the foundations of the show to its core, and then told us not to care immediately after. This episode really tore a big hole in the fandom, and has been lauded to no end over the last 5 years. Now, normally, it's forbidden to be positive about The Timeless Children, and today will be no exception.
I think you're such an impressive young woman. Never thrown by anything, always fighting.
Thanks for the summary of Yaz's character, Graham.
I do believe you're appealing to my better nature, and we both know I don't have one.
Another line that would be soul-crushing had this series acknowledged Missy in any way. Okay, and with that, we've discussed all the other noteworthy things that happened in this episode. Time for the main hook. This whole series has been building up to the mystery of the Timeless Child. The Doctor being told everything she knows is a lie, meeting a past incarnation she has no memory of, the Master destroying Gallifrey. Somehow, I still don't know, how did he do it? And this episode finally answers all of these mysteries, in the form of a PowerPoint presentation where the Master explains the true history of Time Lord society. On its own, this is just a pretty boring and anticlimactic way to conclude your series narrative, literally just explaining the plot, but that's about what I expected. The child spawns in and gets adopted, and is a mystery until she falls off a cliff and doesn't die. Then the mystery is completely solved. Pack it up, gang. So the entirety of Time Lord society was, in fact, built on this child's regenerative abilities being exploited. Now, the Time Lords manipulating things and hiding their corrupt secrets is nothing new. The Doctor knows all too well that their society was composed of corrupt old bureaucrats who couldn't be trusted. So how does she react to this new reveal of them being corrupt?
Why would they lie? Why would they do that?
Genuinely, has 13 ever watched an episode of Doctor Who? And, in an incredibly shocking twist, the Doctor is the Timeless Child. What a completely insane and unpredictable plot twist. Black Mirror and Inside Number 9 could never. Wow. Ugh. I genuinely don't know what I could say here that hasn't been said a million times over. This is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the Doctor as a character on so many levels. Their whole thing was that they were just an ordinary Time Lord with a rebellious streak who wanted to run away and see the universe. They weren't some hero who'd been prophesized, they were just a traveller who wanted to learn and help out. This reveal doesn't undo that per se, but rather makes it kinda redundant. Now the Doctor is the foundation of the very society they wanted to rebel against, making them out to be some destined, important hero. To be honest, one of the main things that pisses me off about this reveal is that it basically gives the middle finger to the 12th Doctor's entire arc. Oh boy, time to talk about the 12th Doctor some more. A big lore change when Doctor Who came back in 2005 was that the Doctor was now the last of the Time Lords. There had been a war between them and the Daleks, which ended in the Doctor having to destroy both races to end the war. This was a defining part of the Doctor's character for the first 7 series of the show, so much weight being added to the words Time Lord and Gallifrey, the Doctor gaining this reputation of a lonely god. This was a great arc to give the Doctor, but it was clear by the 11th Doctor era that it was getting a bit stale and needed a shake-up. So, in the 50th anniversary special, all the Doctors team up and save Gallifrey. A satisfying conclusion to the narrative of the Time War and the Doctor's arc of self-discovery and healing, and a great opportunity to move the show forward into new territory. Like I said, the Doctor's character and motivations for series 1 to 7 of the revival heavily centered around the guilt and trauma of the Time War. But with that narrative over, the Doctor feels like he's lost touch with who he used to be, and isn't sure who he is now without that guilt hanging over him, and that's where the Am I a Good Man arc of series 8 comes from, concluding with the Doctor finally getting back in touch with who he used to be before the Time War. The Doctor is no longer this impossible deity, he's back to the way he used to be, a cosmic hobo running from his home planet. And that arc continues and evolves, the Doctor properly remembering who he is and what he stands for by the end of Series 10, deconstructing his morality and life up until this point. This arc is just one of the many reasons why 12 is my favourite Doctor, and this reveal just disregards the whole thing. The Doctor isn't anyone special. They weren't born superior, they were just an underachieving rebel on their home planet who ran away and tried to do good. Anyone could be the Doctor, as long as you laugh hard, run fast, and be kind. But not anymore. Now the Doctor is a magical being who was born superior. Although I do want to bring up one thing that a lot of people get wrong. There are plenty of people who, to be frank, have only watched JXC's video about the 13th Doctor, which was made before Series 13. And in that series, it's revealed that the Doctor's timeless child consciousness was stored in a fob watch, and that the Doctor we know is still a regular Time Lord. This doesn't completely undo the stupidity of the timeless child reveal. I just wanted to mention this before people start going on in the comments about how the Doctor now has unlimited regenerations. They don't, as far as we know. Also, I know the comments are going to be full of the Master should have been the timeless child, and like, yeah, I agree, we get it. But I can see why the Master would destroy Gallifrey after finding this out. All of the Master's existence and abilities come from the person they love and hate the most. The Master is always trying to one-up the Doctor, so this reveal gives the Doctor insane high ground whenever they meet in future. I can see why that would get to him. It's a weird sort of irony. The Master clearly relies on the Doctor for validation to some degree, so to have that reinforced probably created some conflicting feelings. There was a plan similar to the Timeless Child back in the late 80s. During the 7th Doctor era, script editor Andrew Cartmel wanted to add some mystery back into the character of the Doctor, and began planting seeds for a reveal now commonly known in the fandom as the Cartmel Master Plan. See, there were 3 people believed to be the founders of Time Lord Society: Rassilon, Omega, and the Other, the latter of which remains unidentified. The Cartmel Master Plan was to reveal that the Doctor is a reincarnation of the Other, with hints being planted throughout the 7th Doctor's tenure. The show was cancelled before this reveal could happen, but the Timeless Child basically revived this plot, but with a side order of extra character assassination. And then, to top it all off, after this earth-shattering lore is revealed that shakes the very foundation of the show to its core, we're told it doesn't matter.
Have you ever been limited by who you were before?
Now that does sound like me talking.
Like, okay, but in that case, what was the point of this reveal? You can't just turn the show's mythos on its head and then tell us we shouldn't care. I agree with the sentiment, the Doctor is still the Doctor no matter what, but that actively contradicts the big reveal you've been hyping up all series, and just makes it seem like a waste of time. You want to make the Doctor an all-powerful, immortal god? Fine. But at least have the decency to actually fucking do something with that narrative. And then the Doctor breaks out of the Matrix, the thing designed to hold every Time Lord memory, by using her memories. There's a billion years of Time Lord history, probably hundreds of billions of Time Lords that have ever existed. But sure, I don't care anymore either. The one thing I kinda like about this whole thing is the reveal that the story of the policeman in Ireland from the last episode was a disguised memory of the Doctor's past. That was a pretty good reveal, credit where it's due. And God knows this episode needs credit. Although these scenes were never implied to be in the Doctor's memory, they just seem like some other narrative running parallel in the story, but whatever, I'll take literally anything at this point. Anyway, what else happens in this episode? Well, the Master turns all the dead Time Lords into Cybermen. Okay, cool idea. Shame they do literally nothing here. It's also at this point that the episode's dialogue and narrative also become suspiciously similar to another series finale.
The TARDIS is taking you home.
The TARDIS will take you back to Earth.
I won't let you.
And I bet you're fussing and moaning now. Typical.
We're not letting you go. You're not doing
Get
this.
off me, Az!
Have a fantastic life.
Live great lives.
I want to see you become like me.
Become death. Become me.
Mankind will be harvested because of your weakness.
The universe will suffer for your weakness.
The Series 1 finale ends with the Doctor facing an impossible choice. He can wipe out the Daleks for good, at the cost of killing the entire human race in the process. It's a striking parallel of the decision to end the Time War that he made so recently. Those emotions are still very raw at this point, but he makes the decision to spare the Daleks. A clear and impactful conclusion to the Doctor's arc across Series 1. Here, the Doctor has the choice to kill the Master and the Cybermasters. Double genocide once more. But she refuses. But then this old guy shows up and says, "Pretty please let me die instead," and the Doctor takes the cruel and cowardly option. She willingly lets someone else die in her place. It's ironic, really, all that stuff about how she's still the Doctor no matter what, only for her basic principles to be disregarded because Chris Chibnall couldn't think of another way out of the situation that he wrote. Now, don't get me wrong, the Ninth Doctor was bailed out of his decision by godlike circumstances, but the context is completely different here. Firstly, Nine didn't choose for this to happen. Rose decided to act and risk her own life in his name, showing the inspiration the Doctor has over those he meets. Secondly, the whole heart of the TARDIS thing had already been established 2 episodes ago, and most importantly, this ending still has consequences for the Doctor. He has to use a regeneration to save Rosa's life. No matter what, the Doctor still dies, but he dies satisfied that he made the right decision, and has taken the first step of many to overcoming the guilt of the Time War. 13 just gets bailed out by this guy, and leaves him to kill himself. No remorse, no contemplation of her morals, just pure cowardice. Every New Who Doctor up until this point died in an act of self-sacrifice, always to save either one person or a small group of people who they could have left to die, but didn't. Based on 13's behaviour over the last 2 series, I could not see her doing anything remotely that selfless. It's a tragically disheartening end to a narrative that was trying so hard to show us that this is still the Doctor. Immediately after this episode aired, the world went to shit. Coincidence? The Timeless Children is once again a complete failure on so many levels. The plot is boring and stupid, the Cybermen are mostly sidelined and underutilized once again, the Timeless Child reveal is anticlimactic and fundamentally asinine, the Doctor's morals are once again squandered, and the episode ends with a rip-off of one of the show's best series finales. I regret to say that the hate for this episode is justified. Even if you look past the Timeless Child reveal itself, what you're left with is a bland, poorly written mess that fails to be a satisfying conclusion to the series in almost every way. Once again, the series is topped off with a New Year's Day special, and what better way to conclude Series 12 than with a sequel to Resolution? I mean, this episode doesn't bring back Ryan's dad, which is an improvement, but it does bring back the Trump parody from Arachnids in the UK, so can't win 'em all. There's also that guy from Utopia. Like with Resolution, the new ideas involving the Daleks are probably my favourite parts of this episode. The Dalek from Resolution has been reworked and made into a drone to help maintain a police state and avoid civil uprising. That's really cool. I also like the demonstration of the Dalek spraying water instead of shooting people. Meanwhile, the Doctor is stuck in prison. The last episode ended with the Judoon teleporting into the TARDIS and arresting her, which they can do, I guess. I like all the alien cameos we see here. I have no idea how they imprisoned a weeping angel or a silent, but fair play. There's also a Pating from the episode that doesn't exist, trust me, it never happened. The Doctor's companions are back on Earth, the old TARDIS they took in the last episode being disguised as a house now. I like the bit of Ryan opening the front door by clicking his fingers. Yaz has been living in the TARDIS, devoted to finding out where the Doctor went and how to find her, so fixated that she didn't even know it was New Year. It's been 10 months since... God, why? But she doesn't give up. Yaz has definitely been portrayed as the most attached to the Doctor at this point, so I like this whole thing of her being so fixated on finding her again, despite not knowing if she's even alive. Graham and Ryan aren't so sure she's still out there, but they've chosen to keep fighting in her name instead, wanting to investigate the new Dalek drone. The Doctor inspiring those they meet is a recurring trope, and it shows that these guys have definitely developed in confidence while travelling with her. The Doctor gets broken out by Captain Jack, who finally does more than give foreshadowing. There are definitely a couple of lines that I want to say are just nods to previous episodes, but given the last episode, I'm not so sure.
Have you had work done?
You can talk. Have you had work done? You can talk.
How did you manage to smuggle that in here?
You really want me to answer that?
Where were you hiding that?
You really don't want to know.
The Doctor reunites with her friends, who are understandably angry for being abandoned for 10 months. More angry than they were when they were seconds away from suffocating in space the day after they met her. But then it's immediately forgotten about 10 seconds later.
Yeah, well, it's done now, so...
Yep, thanks Ryan. The Daleks are introduced to the nation on a live news broadcast. It's weird because the actual hateful part of the Dalek is gone from these models, but they're still a universal symbol of hate. But Ian from Utopia has lab-grown a clone of the Dalek mutant from Resolution, and it possesses him. Yeah, it's more of the same from Resolution, it's alright. There's also a surprisingly good character moment between the Doctor and Ryan. Ryan says that he's enjoyed getting back to normal life, saying it was what he needed, implying that he's kind of wanting to move on from the TARDIS. He also straight up calls out the Doctor when she starts being vague and dodging questions.
And the Master, what did he want with you?
It doesn't even matter now.
No, don't give me that. You're trying to avoid the subject.
It reminds me of when you're starting to drift apart from a friend and you become less tolerant of the things they do that you previously would have been willing to look past. It's a nice moment of assertiveness from Ryan. He also says he's been reconnecting with his dad during those 10 months. Ryan's dad doesn't appear in this episode, so we can't know for sure if he's really made an effort to grow and change, but hopefully he has. This scene is good. Until the Doctor starts expositing her feelings about her past being hidden from her, just outright saying she feels
angry,
despite those feelings or emotions not actually showing up in any way in this episode. But yeah, apart from that, it really seems like Ryan has grown and matured a fair bit in those 10 months. Shame we don't see any of that character development on screen, but hey, it's something. The Doctor has this kind of arc of wondering who she is, only to realise she's still the Doctor, but we literally did this last episode. Why are we just doing the same arc again with no actual change or development? Yeah, it's from this point the episode goes downhill fast. There are a bunch of lab-grown Dalek mutants, and they get teleported into the Dalek shelves. To deal with these Daleks, the Doctor summons more Daleks. There's a brief Dalek civil war, and eventually all the reformed Daleks are killed. The Doctor has a plan to kill all the other Daleks, but wouldn't this plan have worked with the original Daleks? Why did she invite a bunch of other Daleks, who she admits herself are more dangerous, and ends up causing a Dalek civil war, resulting in destruction and probably a lot of death? So, what's the plan? Well, the Doctor lands her TARDIS in the open, and every single Dalek decides the logical thing to do is ram their way inside. But whoops, it's the house TARDIS from earlier. The Doctor sends the Daleks to the void, destroying the TARDIS in the process. Just ignore how TARDISes have been shown to have genuine consciousness and feeling. God, I feel like a broken record at this point, but it's just impossible to ignore that the 13th Doctor keeps making really dodgy moral decisions that the show refuses to acknowledge. The TARDIS is a living thing, one of the few remnants of her home planet, now destroyed for a third time. And she destroys it so callously, all to defeat a bunch of Daleks that didn't need to be there in the first place. So yeah, Ryan leaves the TARDIS at the end. You could see this as a long-term narrative for the Doctor. She thought she could just pick back up where things left off, after abandoning Amy for 12 years made her overly confident in that regard. It's a shame Ryan only starts getting interesting and layered now, just as he's leaving, but it's character development, I guess. I mean, he went from no character to somewhat of a character. Does that count as development? And Graham decides to leave too, prioritising his time with Ryan over adventures in the TARDIS. Ryan and Graham's relationship has clearly developed over time, and Graham doesn't want to abandon Ryan like his dad did. I think Graham has had the most character development out of these three, and hey, this exit is actually pretty good. The Doctor considers going back and changing the timelines so they'd stay together. And not wanting to let their friends go is nothing new for the Doctor. I mean, we've seen how far the Doctor is willing to go for their friends, and given 13's lack of consideration or morality, it wouldn't surprise me if she genuinely did that. The episode ends with Ryan and Graham back on that hill, Ryan still trying to ride a bike. He still struggles, but he's improved, which is a realistic portrayal from my experience. They also decide to investigate alien things all over the world. It's a good ending for the characters. Revolution of the Daleks is unfortunately let down by a pretty bad third act, but in terms of an epilogue to follow this, you could do a lot worse. Jack Nicholson is a lot better in this episode. He's still treated like a dickhead, but without the valid points in a moral debate. And Captain Jack is alright, not quite as eccentric or interesting as he used to be, but he's got some funny moments. Like I said, the episode does have a really low point in the third act, with some repetitive character drama for the Doctor that doesn't add anything or go anywhere. The way the Daleks are defeated is also very stupid, and once again completely botches the Doctor's morals. The episode is redeemed a bit by a genuinely good exit for Graham and Ryan. I think their exit could have hit harder had their development and maturity been built up a little more over time, rather than suddenly growing a lot in this episode, but whatever, it's a decent send-off. But yeah, not that bad of an ending for the series. Series 12 is an improvement over Series 11. I realise that's like saying the Cold War was an improvement over World War II, but still, I think Series 12 has higher highs than Series 11. There are times where the character moments are pretty good, and I think overall the stories are better. There are still plenty of very bad episodes, don't get me wrong, but they're more bad than boring, and I'd rather watch a bad episode than a boring one. Spyfall Part 1 is a great opener, immediately feeling like a massive step in the right direction, only for Part 2 to immediately forget about all that and go back to the status quo. As for the rest of the episodes, please fuck off, decent, not a real episode, decent, fuck yeah, seriously go away, I will get a restraining order, and decent. Something I noticed about Series 12 is that there are a lot of similarities to RTD's original run. As I said earlier, Series 11 was a pretty fresh start for the show, and Series 12 seemed insistent on changing that, and trying to recapture the magic of RTD1, without really understanding the essence of what made that period of the show work. Fugitive of the Judoon and The Timeless Children are the main examples of this. Both contain dialogue lines and events that you could interpret as references or callbacks if you really wanted to, but come off more as a shoddy attempt to recreate past glories. Series 12 basically just goes, hey, remember this stuff? Yeah, you like this stuff. Look, I have this stuff, am I cool now? Series 12 may try to differentiate itself from Series 11, but a lot of the problems carry over. Most importantly, the 13th Doctor's morality. Unfortunately, her recklessness hasn't changed as she makes many bad decisions throughout the series, be it weaponizing the Master's skin colour to make him face a harsher punishment, not trying to comfort Graham as he confides in her about the fear of his cancer coming back, which may I remind you comes at the end of an episode that encourages you to talk to others about your feelings. There's also the willingly leaving someone else to die in her place and willingly killing one of the few TARDISes left in existence, which we know to be conscious beings. Now, to be clear, I'm not opposed to the Doctor doing questionable or downright evil things. If anything, I love it. What matters is that the show is self-aware about the Doctor's behaviour. Episodes like The Waters of Mars and Hellbent are perfect examples of this. In these episodes, the Doctor's morality is put into question, as they make some very shady decisions, behaving cruelly and cowardly without considering the ramifications of their actions. But what matters is that these actions are part of the overall narrative. I mean, hell, look at the Doctor's entire character in Series 8. I know his behaviour in that series can be a little contentious in the fandom, but it works because the show is self-aware about it. The Doctor has behaved wrongly in the past, but they always get brought back down to reality in the end, acknowledge their wrongdoing, and move on. The Doctor is not perfect. They can be consumed by anger and revenge from time to time, but they always come out of it a better person. I do not get that impression with 13. So many of her episodes involve her making a decision that ranges from questionable to downright horrific. But the thing that ruins it is that the show never puts these actions into question. The 13th Doctor never stops and thinks about her decisions. She's always portrayed as the unfaltering hero who can do no wrong, a title she really doesn't deserve. It's a shame, really. I think a more morally grey Doctor would have been an interesting direction to take, especially after the complete deconstruction and dissection of the character in the Capaldi era. But no, she does these bad things and we're supposed to just accept it and move on. I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship when I watch the 13th Doctor. You know, it's funny. I constantly see people complain about how woke the Chibnall era is, but it's genuinely the most right-wing period of the show. We've already been through all of the things the Doctor does that go against the character's left-wing morals, but beyond that, the show's idea of being progressive isn't extreme or forced in any way. The Chibnall era's idea of progressivism is to just tell us that a character is in a gay relationship and expect us to accept that over an actual character. There are less bad messages the episodes try to push this time around, only the pretty ham-fisted surface-level lectures in Orphan 55 and Can You Hear Me. Not great, but a massive improvement over the offensively bad stories and morals of Rosa, Arachnids, Kerblam, It Takes You Away, and Resolution. Then there's the timeless child reveal. I won't go on about it any more than I need or want to, but you know, turning the show's lore on its head and then immediately telling us not to care, and then doing the exact same thing one episode later, is definitely a choice. It did give us the Ruth Doctor, who I think is pretty cool. Jo Martin, who plays the Doctor, is a lifelong fan of the show, and I think it's nice that she got what was presumably her dream role, brief though it may have been. The Master is also one of my favourite parts of the series. Sacha Dhawan does a great job of portraying the manic genius of the character in a fresh, more loud and chaotic way. The zero acknowledgement of Missy really saddens me, but I can still appreciate the Spy Master as is. He's pretty cool. So yeah, Series 12 has some good stuff. Spyfall Part 1 and The Haunting of Villa Diodati are my personal favourites. Unfortunately, a lot of Series 11's issues carry over, and then Series 12 shoves a truckload of extra problems on top. It has its moments, and I think it starts and ends on a high note, but yeah, Series 11 is still my least favourite New Who series, and Series 12 is a step or two above in second. Alright, we're already on the 13th Doctor's final series. Series 13. This series is slightly shorter than the other two, containing 9 episodes instead of 11. These episodes were also more spaced out, the first 6 airing in 2021 and the final 3 airing sporadically throughout 2022. Oh yeah, also this whole series was pretty much immediately overshadowed by the announcement that Russell T Davies would be returning as Doctor Who's showrunner. Production on Series 13 was massively affected due to the entirety of 2020. And so the bulk of Series 13 was a continuous narrative spread over 6 episodes. The Flux. I love Flux as a concept. I wanted a series of Doctor Who that was just one big overall story for years. We had a semi-serialized narrative with Series 6, but here, everything links together and I love it. Honestly, I think if we're just gonna get less episodes per series from now on, I think they should just stick to this format. Like I said, the state of the world at the time had a massive impact on the series, but you'd struggle to tell from the finished product. Like, yeah, there often won't be many people on set at once, and characters will often be spaced apart, but I reckon most people wouldn't be able to tell this was filmed during COVID unless you told them. There's no denying the Chibnall era so far has been a bit rough, but is Series 13 another improvement? Honestly, yeah, I think so. Series 13 is definitely a step in the right direction, and it sucks that the 13th Doctor era came to an end just as it seemed to be finding its footing at last. I mean, I love a good overarching narrative, but beyond that, most of Series 11 and 12's problems aren't as bad as they used to be here. So yeah, let's get into the series. The Halloween apocalypse gets off to a good start. The Doctor and Yaz already seem stronger and more coordinated now that it's just the two of them. I mean, they are in a very perilous situation, but I think the main cast being less overcrowded now really makes the show feel more confident in itself. The episode starting with this fast-paced chase scene really does set the stage for how massive this series is going to be, as well as creating a lot of intrigue for what's about to happen. Also, the Chibnall era so far has been a bit hit and miss with its comedy, but I genuinely find this bit really funny.
Push activated! Release! Or maybe I was Scottish when I set them up! Release! What a relief.
A lot of this first episode, and consequently the rest of the series, revolves around Liverpool. That's how you know this series is going to be scary. The episode brings up the mystery of the Williamson tunnels, a load of massive tunnels that run underneath Liverpool. The purpose of these tunnels has never been confirmed, so naturally Doctor Who aims to give a wacky sci-fi explanation for them. Chris Chibnall is also from Liverpool, get well soon, so I can respect wanting to bring attention to your hometown. Anyway, fast forward to the future and we're introduced to the new companion for this series, Dan Lewis, played by John Bishop. And I'm instantly blown away by how much stronger his introduction is compared to Series 11's introductions. He feels like an actual bloke. He reacts like a normal person to things. He's endearing and clearly kind-hearted. And the way he interacts with Carbonista after getting his door smashed in is very funny.
Halloween! Trick or treat!
I love how this bit is played so dramatically, but like, why did she say that? Honestly though, Yaz is pretty good in this episode. She's clearly growing in confidence now that it's just her and the Doctor, and there are times where she's clearly trying to emulate the Doctor's behaviour. Probably not the best incarnation to idolize, but you do you, Yaz. This episode does a lot of setting up mysteries, but it doesn't feel like key jangling. You can tell a proper story is being set up here, with mysteries to be solved, rather than the episode just going, hey look, this stuff will mean something later. Maybe. There's so much being set up that hints at just how big things are about to get, with this Claire woman running into the Doctor, clearly knowing her in the future, or the TARDIS door being in the wrong place. The Doctor is clearly still dealing with the stress of not knowing her own past, and it seems like Series 13 might actually do something new with this narrative. That would be pretty cool. I sure hope that happens. She becomes overly defensive when Yaz presses her for answers, as more info about her previous lives is being teased. Swarm and Azure clearly knowing her from her time in Division. Speaking of Swarm and Azure, these guys are great. They have such a casual badassness about them, and their design is really cool. There's also this Weeping Angel cameo, and I honestly think brief cameos are when the Angels are at their best. This scene is tense. That, and also Claire has clearly met the Angels before, so this clearly isn't the last we'll be seeing of them. There's also the twist that the Lupari aren't invaders, and are trying to protect humanity from the impending danger. It's a fine reveal, nowhere near as egregious or far-fetched as Demons of the Punjab, and it does make for a good dynamic, particularly between Carvanista and Dan, the Lupari saving humanity out of obligation more than anything. There's also a moment where the Doctor is trying to give a dramatic speech, which gets undercut, but not by her own awkwardness. Instead, she gets distracted by a call sign. It might not seem like much, but it just feels so refreshing seeing the Doctor not brought down by her own self-consciousness, but instead in another moment that shows how out of her depth she is right now. So much going on and so many questions racing around her mind. This is the most quintessential way for a companion to meet the Doctor. The main villains of Flux are actually the Sontarans. The Daleks and the Cybermen also exist, but the Sontarans play a pretty major role in this series, and I like that. I also like their behaviour in this series. They're a lot more in touch with their classic Who selves, even down to their design. Honestly, something in the RTD era that I was never a big fan of was how the Daleks and the Sontarans were portrayed as way too formal and restricted, feeling like they'd been streamlined to avoid seeming too goofy or camp. Flux isn't afraid to give them a bit of a quirky nature while still portraying them as proper warriors, which I think is a good direction to take them. Anyway, the episode ends with the TARDIS under attack by the Flux, the big mass of whatever the hell this is destroying anything in its path. The Doctor does one last thing to try and keep Earth safe, which is how I imagine they'd want to go out. She also opens the heart of the TARDIS, which we've seen contains unimaginable power, and it does nothing. Things truly feel hopeless, and the Doctor's final line in this episode is actually pretty perfect.
The end of the universe! I always wondered what it would feel like!
Sometime after Series 12, Chris Chibnall must have been visited by the three ghosts of good writing, because I think the Halloween Apocalypse might be my favourite 13th Doctor episode. I love The Haunting of Villa Diodati for its creepy atmosphere, witty writing, and how well it balances all of the stuff it has going on at once. But this episode also just has a lot that makes a Doctor Who episode stand out to me. There's a lot going on in the episode, but nothing feels rushed or unexplored. There's a lot of setup for the rest of the series, but the episode doesn't rely on the rest of the series, and stands out in its own way. Dan's introduction is great. The way we're introduced to him is such a breath of fresh air compared to what came before. The 13th Doctor also feels like she's improved a lot. She hasn't made any cruel or cowardly decisions or been overly self-conscious so far, and she feels a lot more in touch with the character historically, while still containing some of the bumbling silliness they're known for. Yaz still does a bit of just standing around asking questions, but since there's only one of her now, it feels less awkward. The episode sets up its mysteries and plot brilliantly. I'm really hooked watching all the plot points unfold, and like I said, the cliffhanger is awesome. The Halloween Apocalypse is a banger episode, genuinely up there with some of the greats. I'm officially really hyped for the rest of Flux. So, the Doctor is not actually dead, but the TARDIS was thrown back to the Crimean War. Except the war is now against the Sontarans instead of the Russians.
What's the difference?
This is genuinely a really cool and funny concept. Plus, it puts the spotlight on Mary Seacole, a nurse during the Crimean War who often gets forgotten about in favour of Florence Nightingale.
You seen that?
Honestly, this feels like a pretty mundane observation, but again, it just feels so refreshing seeing characters properly react to things. If this was Ryan, he'd probably just be like, "Whoa, my hand's glowing." It's funny, Dan is such an ordinary, down-to-earth scouser, but that ends up making him all the more interesting, seeing him react to one of the craziest storylines in the show's entire history.
Alright, lads. I was just looking for the period.
This series so far is really intent on making the TARDIS seem powerless, either by having it compromised by the Flux or the door suddenly disappearing. It really sells that there is no easy way out of this situation. So, the Sontarans used a weak moment to infiltrate the Earth and have manipulated its entire history. It makes sense there'd be opportunistic races out there who'd use a universe-ending event like the Flux for their benefit. It's just nice having a proper Sontaran outing again. There's also this Sontaran who's basically Strax but less funny, even played by the same guy. Also, apparently the Sontarans have the ability to time travel now. Not sure how, I kinda wish that was brought up here. Like, what if they looted Gallifrey's remains or something? Something could have actually come from the second destruction of Gallifrey. I don't see why they didn't do that. Yaz gets taken to the Temple of Atropos, where she meets Vinda, who first appeared in the previous episode. There's still a lot of mystery here, these diamond light things talking about time like it's some unstoppable villain. But they're not wrong. Time does destroy everything in the end. Is that what the Flux is? Is it just a mass buildup of time speeding up the destruction of everything? The episode parodies the Charge of the Light Brigade, a real event during the Crimean War, where a miscommunication led to a massacre with 118 British soldiers killed. Things are slightly different here though. Like I said, the real-world event came down to miscommunication, whereas the massacre in this episode comes down to a reckless desire for war. The Doctor also references the poem about the charge by Alfred Tennyson.
Where are we going?
Half a league onward.
Anyway, Dan and Carvanista reunite, they still have some good chemistry, and they ram the Sontarans, cause why not? The Doctor defeats the Sontarans as well, but the Lieutenant General blows them all up, claiming to be avenging his soldiers. The soldiers that wouldn't have died if it wasn't for his recklessness. Honestly, this character is portrayed as really unlikable throughout the episode without just being a caricature, another sign of Series 13's improved characterization. And the episode ends back at the temple. Swarm and Azure are once again very badass. To be honest, there's not much to say, since so much of what's happening is still a complete mystery, but yeah, War of the Sontarans is a pretty good second part. I like the handling of the Sontarans. They're portrayed as a proper, powerful threat, but they've still got a bit of that classic camp goofiness to them. I like the whole concept of them invading Earth and manipulating its history, even if it's never really explained where they got time travel technology from. The episode's pacing is solid. Dan continues to be endearing and funny in his own way, the same with his parents.
Fella in Baconhead.
He was drunk, with a mallet. Baconhead.
Overall, a lot of the good stuff from the Halloween apocalypse carries over. Flux has been pretty good so far. Once Upon Time explores the characters as they revisit previous memories, with the people in them swapped out for the main cast. I think the special effects in this scene are kinda silly, and I think Mandip Gill is trying to do a southern accent here. But yeah, this is pretty cool. The Doctor's flashbacks are easily the most interesting though, as she relives an old memory from her time in Division, when she was the Fugitive Doctor. Jodie does a really good job here, I could immediately tell she was impersonating the Fugitive Doctor, despite us not seeing much of her overall. There's a lot that goes on here, things hop from one place to the next very quickly, so it's kinda hard to find things to talk about or focus on. It seems like every time things are starting to make sense, another 5 questions get added on top, which is fine, as long as everything is properly resolved by the end.
Do you want me to be single forever?
What a normal reaction to your £400 console being destroyed. There's also this person, Belle, played by Thadia Graham, who also played O in the final series of Sex Education. And she doesn't really do much here, just kind of shows us that the Daleks and the Cybermen are also taking advantage of the Flux. I'm not a big fan of when this Cyberman explains their motivations.
We shall command, we shall rule, the cyber victory shall be ultimate.
Once again, a fundamental misunderstanding of the Cybermen here, which is nothing new for the show, unfortunately. Their goal isn't domination, their goal is survival. Okay, so they want to convert the little life that will remain after the Flux. Makes sense. But they shouldn't be doing that to rule the universe. We've already got the Daleks wanting to be the dominant lifeforms, and the Sontarans purely thriving on chaos and war. So the Cybermen just wanting to survive would fit with their original motivations, and would give these three races different reasons for capitalizing on the Flux, making it more satisfying when they inevitably end up at war with each other. Like I said, this episode is very all over the place with its story. It feels kind of Moffat-y. It's definitely an interesting direction, and stands out more than War of the Sontarans, which, despite being a solid episode in its own right, didn't do a lot with the uniqueness of Flux as a series. The thing is, we're now halfway through this series, and we've barely seen any of the Flux or what it's really done. We just keep getting told the Flux is destroying everything, and that's it. Just being told the universe is being destroyed isn't really enough, especially since we've already seen that happen in Series 5, which I think handled the concept a lot better, showing the personal effects. Anyway, they fixed the Temple of Atropos, sort of, but a weeping angel suddenly hijacks the TARDIS, and the episode ends. I like how unique this episode is, really taking advantage of the timey-wimey effects of the Flux, and delving into the past of all these characters. The Doctor's flashbacks are definitely my favourites, but at the same time, it feels kind of redundant. The Doctor has already had this arc of stressing about her past before deciding it doesn't matter. Twice. And this series basically goes down the same path, just more long-winded. Having the Doctor still wondering about her past life, only for the show to keep telling us it isn't important and doesn't define her, is a bit repetitive. Also, not sure how I feel about the first POC actor to play the Doctor being overshadowed and cast aside once more, as 13 takes her place the vast majority of the time. Joe Martin has felt incredibly underutilized as the Doctor so far. It's a real shame. That being said, these flashbacks do give Jodie the chance to show some range as the Doctor, with a more snarky and determined version of the character, and she really shines with the material she's given. I honestly think 13 would have been much better and more interesting if she was like this all the time. We've seen elements of her confident, passive-aggressive nature in previous episodes, and I think it's when she's at her best. Make her a snarky character, have the show call her out on her dodgy behaviour, and you've got an incredibly nuanced and interesting take on the Doctor with lots of potential. Instead, she retains this overly sweet, innocent personality, which clashes heavily with the decisions she makes. Vinder's backstory is really good though, as we learn about his history with this guy, the Grand Serpent. Craig Parkinson is a highlight of this episode, and thankfully he does show up again later on in the series. I think this episode is really interesting, and like the Halloween Apocalypse, tries to balance a lot at once. But unlike that episode, this one struggles to hold its weight, and so a lot of its interesting ideas don't feel properly explored. It's not a bad episode, but I think there has been a noticeable downward trend throughout the series so far. Episode 4 is Village of the Angels, which seems to often be considered the best episode of Flux, and I can see why. To be honest, this episode is similar to War of the Sontarans in that it's a good episode on its own, but pretty disconnected from the Flux narrative. The episode starts with Claire, from the first episode, being experimented on by a scientist in the 60s. I'm immediately interested in this scientist. He seems quite nice and endearing, until Claire has what looks like a seizure, and his immediate response is to record what's happening rather than helping her. Is he just an inconsiderate dickhead, or is this just a regular occurrence? I don't know, but it does immediately make this character interesting. I really like the way the Weeping Angels are used in this episode. They feel like a proper threat, mainly because of just how fast they are. To be honest, there were some times in their previous episodes where they seemed to move oddly slowly, which I get was to build up tension, but it kinda goes against the faster than you can believe thing. Here though, they go zooming, and in the literal blink of an eye. There's also some cool things the Angels do, like this drawing piecing itself together and coming back to life. There's also this scene where they talk to Jericho using his own voice, which I honestly think might be the creepiest Weeping Angel moments ever. This episode is kind of a base under siege with the Weeping Angels, but they're looking for a rogue Weeping Angel. A fugitive, if you will. The Doctor has a conversation with the rogue angel inside Claire's mind, and I like the imagery here, but I'm not so keen on the Doctor explaining what's happening.
A weeping angel needs my help. A rogue weeping angel on the run from other angels, hiding in the mind of a human.
Like, yeah, thanks, I know. But the reveal that these angels are working for Division is an interesting twist. The Doctor's escapades in this episode are easily the best part. Unfortunately, they're limited by the other storylines of Yaz and Dan being stuck in 1901. And on top of that, we get more of Belle doing literally nothing. I mean, she meets this guy, who I probably wouldn't remember or care about if he wasn't played by Neil from The Inbetweeners.
I stopped believing in God when I realised it was just dog backwards.
You're kidding.
Well, when you think about it, G-O-D-D-O-G. It's like an anagram, but a backwards one, isn't it?
Thank you.
Belle has a romance with Vinda, which is apparently so important to the story that it undercuts this bombshell of a cliffhanger. But I just have no reason to care for this dynamic. There's nothing there. Vinda is a pretty cool character so far. He's just had barely anything to do. And it really feels like Flux has gradually collapsed under its own weight more and more. But yeah, this episode's ending is one of the best moments of the Chibnall era. The Doctor runs from the angels only to notice they aren't chasing her. We've spent the whole episode believing the angels are after Claire, or specifically the rogue angel inside her, but it turns out the whole thing was a trap. They're here for the Doctor, and they turn her into an angel, which is a brilliantly haunting scene. And that's the end. The Doctor loses. It's a great twist and a fantastic cliffhanger. Yeah, Village of the Angels is easily one of my favourite 13th Doctor episodes. Honestly, I think it would have been better if it was a standalone episode, disconnected from the Flux narrative. This episode was written by the same person who wrote The Haunting of Villa Diodati, and you can see the same spark that episode had, with a creepy atmosphere and interesting characters, mainly Jericho. This episode might actually be the scariest the Angels have ever been, in my opinion at least. They feel threatening and sinister in a new way they haven't really achieved before. Unfortunately, I think the connections back to the Flux narrative are where this episode falls short, with B-plots that I just don't really care for. I really wish the whole episode could have just been the base under siege in a scientist's house. That whole aspect of the episode is honestly great. But yeah, Maxine Alderton delivers yet another highlight of the 13th Doctor era, and I really hope she writes for the show again in future. Survivors of the Flux promises and hints at so much, but does nothing with the incredible potential it has. This episode introduces Tech-Tayun, the woman who found the timeless child, and immediately kills her. Genuinely, what is the point of Tech-Tayun appearing here? She just says what we already know about the Doctor and her mysterious past, and fucking dies. Literally nothing new is added to the narrative by her being here. It's also revealed that the Flux was created because the secret of the timeless child got out. Okay, so a narrative has been created out of the timeless child reveal. Cool. Shame the effects of this narrative on the universe or the Doctor are never acknowledged for the rest of the 13th Doctor's tenure, with RTD handling those effects better in one scene than Chibnall did in an entire series. The episode reveals that Yaz and Dan have been stuck in the early 20th century for 3 years, travelling the world and surviving, and this doesn't seem to change them at all. Dan is in a unique position as a companion right now. He's barely met the Doctor and barely travelled in the TARDIS, as everything has been thrown off by the universe-ending threat of the Flux. He hasn't had a moment to ground himself, familiarise himself with the TARDIS, or life with the Doctor, all while his big character journey is to get home in time for his date. Yeah, it's an unremarkable motivation for a character, but that's the point. Dan is meant to be ordinary, a fresh pair of eyes in the world of the Doctor, but the show does nothing with this. He could represent all the ordinary people whose lives have been impacted by the Flux, as personal stakes have been sorely lacking in this series. But throughout these episodes, he's basically just reduced to Graham but Scouse. Instead, the normal people, the audience surrogates, are Vinda and Belle, which I just don't like. Vinda became really interesting in Once Upon a Time, but has done basically nothing since. And I simply do not care for the romance between him and Belle. And in another incredibly frustrating squandering of potential, we're taken outside the universe where Division operates. We see the briefest of glimpses of another universe where there's so much potential for rich, unique, brand new stories. And then we never see it again. that endless treasure trove of adventures is never explored. I don't get why you'd tease the idea of another universe with at least an entire series worth of potential and not do anything with it. This episode brings back the Grand Serpent, which I think is the best part of this episode. The Grand Serpent desperate for control over another planet after Vinda got him fired. He spends 60 years infiltrating UNIT from within, bringing it down from the inside. Also, the Sontarans can invade Earth again. Now, the idea of UNIT always being compromised and manipulated from the inside every time we've seen it? That's awesome. There is so much narrative potential there. Shame Chibnall fears narrative potential like a vampire fears a cross. I was really hoping for some big moment from Kate at the end here. Some big takedown of the Grand Serpent in an action-packed battle for UNIT. But she just says, "I know what you are," and goes off the grid. The story of the Grand Serpent was a leftover idea from the early pre-COVID ideas of Series 13. A whole episode being planned around the infiltration of UNIT. Yeah, it's a great idea, but it's clearly not going to work to its full potential in Flux. So instead, the Grand Serpent spent decades infiltrating UNIT, all to let the Sontarans into Earth in 2021. About a week after their previous invasion. He presumably oversaw many alien invasions in his time working for the organization, including another Sontaran invasion back in Series 4, and I know it's implied he time traveled throughout all of this, but it just feels like a potentially great idea shoehorned into the Flux narrative. As it stands, Survivors of the Flux is all style and no substance. It's all build-up and no payoff. The whole thing literally exists to say the finale is about to happen, without doing anything of substance in its own right. We're about to enter the final episode of Flux, and it's at this point you'd expect all the storylines to come together. But they don't. There's just all these different narratives going on at once, barely any connection between them, as the series overwhelms itself with how much it has to balance. This is one of the most Chibnall episodes to ever Chibnall, as it's full of that classic 13th Doctor era trope of cool ideas that have their potential wasted. The Doctor being turned into a weeping angel? Cool. Shame it's undone 2 minutes later. Tecteun showing up and revealing she owns all of the Doctor's past memories in a fob watch? Cool. Shame she doesn't add anything new to the Timeless Child narrative and immediately dies. Yaz and Dan exploring the world for 3 years? Cool. Shame it has no impact on their characters or dynamic. Not only that, but their journey around the world is completely fucking pointless. They do nothing of narrative importance. All they do is make this sign, which I think is meant to be like comic relief. But it just comes off as padding with literally no payoff or meaning. Like I said, the Grand Serpent infiltrating UNIT is a great idea. It just should have been its own thing, rather than being poorly tacked onto this series. Flux has really fallen under the weight of its own ambition, and I can't say I'm expecting the conclusion to be anything grand. But, here we go. The Vanquishers. Oh man. Any semblance of good writing or narrative structure that this series initially had is long gone at this point. So the finale involves the Doctor hopping between all the disconnected storylines, none of them having any room to breathe or be explained. First, the Doctor is still on this ship outside the universe, being taunted by Swarm and Azure about her past lives. These two had so much potential at the start, but they've done basically nothing throughout this story, and now they're just kinda here? The Doctor and Azure have a debate that's literally just, life is good. No. That's it. That's their entire discussion. Also, why is this Ood just chilling here outside the universe? Free my mans. Meanwhile, the Sontarans tell Carvanista that his whole race has been killed. And that's it. He tells Dan about it, off-screen, and his grief and anger and sadness are never acknowledged. I don't know what to say, because there's nothing of substance to talk about here. This episode is just full of characters saying things that have happened or will happen, and apparently that's meant to make a substance narrative. And so, the Flux, this thing that destroys all matter, and was created to be strong enough to destroy the universe, is defeated by destroying a load of matter. Then Time appears, and gives the Doctor some incredibly vague foreshadowing about her death, and leaves after 30 seconds.
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
You do realize how impactful to the show this scene could have been. Apparently time is a living entity, and the Doctor is talking to it. There is so much potential for an earth-shattering conversation between them, which we just don't get. Jericho, the only interesting character, dies. This whole plot is about as rushed as I'm making it sound, and the episode ends with the Doctor having the opportunity to open the fob watch, to finally discover her past memories, but she refuses, and disposes of it. Wow, what a compelling character journey. It's not like this is the 4th time this arc has happened over the last 8 episodes. Now we're just back where we started once again. We still know next to nothing about the Doctor's past life, and all this build-up and teasing has essentially been for nothing. This entire arc and storyline was fundamentally pointless. The 3 main villains are defeated in very unsatisfying ways too. The Sontarans are just schlorped by the Flux, Swarm and Azure summon time and are immediately schlorped, and the Grand Serpent is just abandoned on a space rock with no resistance. And so, the Flux is over, with the show never acknowledging it or its devastating effect again for the rest of 13's run. Flux is a pretty massive letdown. What began as a great series brimming with potential gradually reverts to the Chibnall status quo, with too many characters that are all uninteresting, plot threads and character arcs that go nowhere, and an abysmally unsatisfying conclusion. The characters here are bland, and when they're not bland, they're underutilized. Dan is great, and there's real potential for an interesting dynamic between him and the Doctor, as they only share about 10 minutes of screen time across the whole series, only for nothing to come of it. Vinder has an interesting backstory, but has nothing to do the rest of the time. Belle is just such a nothing character. Yaz remains pretty uninteresting, and I just don't believe she and Dan spent 3 years travelling the world, as it changes nothing about them. Swarm and Azure start out as very interesting villains, only for them to do nothing. And the Grand Serpent is genuinely a good villain. He just deserved his own story rather than being poorly crammed into Flux, where his motivations are just kinda dumb. Jericho was the one actually well done character, and his death was the one moment during the Vanquishers where I felt anything. Division's plan as a whole makes 0 sense. They create the Flux to kill the Doctor after the Timeless Child secret is revealed, and their plan is to go to another universe so the Doctor can't find them. But, why not just go to the other universe? Why create the Flux? That's just going to bring more attention to yourselves. Also, the Flux itself just doesn't really function as a threat. It's meant to be some universe-ending threat, but apparently the Lupari have shields that can protect them from it, which they have somehow. The true capability or effect of the Flux is never really shown. We just keep getting told the Flux is destroying everything, and that's it. Flux presents so many narrative strings that it just does nothing with. It brings back Tecteun and immediately kills her. It teases the idea of another universe and does nothing with it. It teases the Doctor's past over and over and does nothing with it. And don't get me started on how rushed and unsatisfying the ending is. Flux is pretty disappointing. And it's a shame because it started off so strong. The Halloween Apocalypse promised so much and seemed like a great opener, with War of the Sontarans and Village of the Angels being great stories as well. It's such a shame everything else felt so rushed and unexplored. I was really invested in this series. I know COVID definitely made production on this series a nightmare, but there's only so much leeway you can give them when Series 11 and 12 had more or less the same issues. I massively commend the production team for putting together a series of Doctor Who in what were absolutely nightmare conditions, and for actually making the first 2/3 really solid. It's just a shame things really fell apart at the end. At this point, only 3 specials remain, but can they end this era on a high? Can Chibnall redeem himself and bring his special sauce into these final few episodes? I'm going to stop talking. First, we get the 2022 New Year's Day special, Eve of the Daleks. Interesting. We just saw the Daleks completely wiped out by the Flux in the previous episode. Perhaps this is the first time the show will properly delve into the aftermath of the Flux? This episode was also heavily impacted by COVID, and so it also had to be rushed out. This episode is about all these guys stuck in a storage facility, being hunted down by Daleks. but every time they die, they reset, but with 1 minute less to live each time. I really like this premise. I love a good time loop story, and the idea of time still counting down is a nice subversion of things. Honestly, this episode feels like Chibnall finally trying to up his game. A big recurring flaw in his episodes is bland characters that it's hard to feel anything for, but the side characters in this episode are actually kinda interesting? They're not flawless characters who I'm rooting for the whole time, but that's fine. They don't have to be. They just have to be interesting. And they are. Sarah is grumpy and spiteful. You can tell she's just so done with everything, and honestly, she's kind of a mood. The material Aisling B was given here is not great, but she really elevates it and is genuinely one of my favourite supporting characters in the Chibnall era. There's also Nick, who is just such a creepy stalker type, who collects souvenirs from girls that have left stuff at his house by accident. He's such a caricature that he does a complete 180 and goes back to being an actually interesting character, but also collecting memories of young women who left him, storing them in an endless expanse, acting all weird and eccentric to entice new people? These characters are flawed, but those flaws are clearly intentional, which feels so refreshing. It's like Chibnall suddenly learned the art of self-awareness and subtext, and it immediately makes this one of his best scripts in my opinion. Chibnall has a thing for overstuffing his episodes with lots of different locations and characters, which always leaves very little room for those things to breathe or be properly explored. So this whole episode being in one location with a small cast really makes things feel more fleshed out. The episode also taps into the Doctor's fear of death that's getting worse since being prophesied by time in the Vanquishers. Her line just before the opening titles of "Not like this" carries more weight than it normally would, now she knows her death is imminent. So, the Daleks want to kill the Doctor as revenge for them all dying in the Flux. This is about as close as we get to any aftermath or consequences for the Flux. The Daleks wanting to kill the Doctor. Revolutionary. The original plan for this episode was for it to be a conclusion to the trilogy of the New Year's Dalek episodes, with it tying a lot more closely to Resolution and Revolution of the Daleks. But time restraints, budget restraints, and COVID restraints meant we got this and Legend of the Sea Devils instead. There were rumours before this episode came out that Davros was planned to appear, and I am curious how Chibnall would have handled him. I do like his take on the Master, and maybe Davros would have given Chibnall the chance to be the classic Who fanboy he clearly is. I like the Daleks in this episode. They continue being one of Chibnall's strong suits. I'm not a fan of them picking and choosing when they have good aim, which is even more egregious now that they suddenly have the ability to rapid fire, but one of them has a funny interaction with Dan, and they do come off as an unpredictable and intimidating threat, constantly one step ahead of the characters. The episode ends with these two deciding they're together now, but he is a creepy loser stalker. Him suddenly willing to let the corridors of ex-girlfriend's belongings get blown up does not suddenly undo that. And the episode starts hinting at a romance between the Doctor and Yaz. Now, for context, Thasmin had been a popular ship among 13th Doctor fans since Series 11, and so Chibnall suddenly decided to start hinting at it in 13's final few episodes. Fine, but nothing comes from it. There are some hints over the next few episodes that they might have a crush on each other. Will they, won't they? Oh, they won't. Okay. I wouldn't go so far as to call this queerbaiting like some people have, but it is kinda strange to suddenly tease us with this romance just as 13's tenure is coming to an end, and then just do nothing with it. Oh yeah, also Carl from The Woman Who Fell to Earth is just there, and he believes all the fireworks are for him. He finally believes he's special and loved. Good on him. Eve of the Daleks is not the strongest 13th Doctor episode, but I do genuinely consider it one of Chris Chibnall's best Doctor Who episodes. The episode has a level of self-awareness that most of his efforts sorely lack, and the episode doesn't take itself too seriously, which ends up working in its favour. The characters are some of the most layered and interesting of the 13th Doctor era. A lot of Chibnall's problems with overstuffing are pretty absent here, and there's a bit of conflict between the Doctor and her companions that isn't just resolved 10 seconds later. The Daleks' terrible accuracy is kinda annoying, but I think that's a criticism that applies to almost every piece of media with a gun in it. And the Thasmin stuff feels kind of random and unexplored. But yeah, honestly, not a bad episode, especially considering it was hastily written within a week. Now for the 13th Doctor's penultimate episode, Legend of the Sea Devils. Man, this is going to be exciting. The return of the Sea Devils, cousins of the Silurians who ruled the oceans millions of years ago, whose return to the show had been highly anticipated for nearly 40 years. Not only that, but each Doctor's second to last episode up until this point has been pretty highly regarded. Boomtown? Alright, nothing amazing, but a good episode. The Waters of Mars, one of the greatest episodes of all time. Day of the Doctor, fantastic anniversary special. And World Enough in Time and The Doctor Falls, my two favourite episodes of the entire show. Legend of the Sea Devils looks like it's on track to being one of Jodie's best episodes. I should stop talking. Right, one of the main problems with this episode is it feels so amateur. This scene where the Doctor meets the Sea Devil is a perfect example of this. The Sea Devil is shivving up all these people, and the way this is filmed is so shoddy. Like, it'll just swing its sword at the camera and it suddenly cuts to these people falling over. It feels so unnatural. Then the Doctor spawns in, and they all capture the Sea Devil in this net that they suddenly just have. Then it breaks free and Mario jumps to its ship. The whole way this is directed and choreographed just feels so strange and subpar, especially for one of the BBC's biggest shows. The editing also feels kinda choppy. We've already seen that with the fight scenes, but I think that mainly comes down to bad choreography. But it feels like so much of this episode was cut in the edit, and it is only 47 minutes, surprisingly short for a special. Okay, now I want to stress that what I'm about to say is purely rumours and hearsay. Please do not take this as fact. But allegedly, the first cut of this episode was put together, and the production team realised that the episode was unintentionally really racist, and so lots of things had to be cut, leaving the editors and VFX team with basically nothing to work with. I am genuinely curious as to what part of this episode was so racist that it was too much for the production team who were willing to let this slide. Okay, now, question for you. Who are the Sea Devils? Now, I gave a brief summary of them a minute ago, and you can look them up on TARDIS Wiki if you want more info, but you can't watch this episode expecting to find out anything about them. Legend of the Sea Devils does nothing to explain who or what the Sea Devils actually are. All the Doctor says is they regard Earth as their own planet, but it is their own planet. They don't regard it as theirs, it factually just is. They've always been here, longer than humans. It's weird seeing the Doctor so dismissive of another race's status on Earth. The episode does a pretty poor job explaining who the Sea Devils are. It's like you're just expected to know all about them and have watched a random serial from 50 years ago. And on top of that, what's their plan in this episode? Well, they want to flip the Earth's geomagnetic pulse and flood the planet. But the Earth still had land on it when the Sea Devils were originally around. They were fine with Pangaea, but then all these woke continents started forming and I guess they had enough. This plan just scientifically makes no sense too. There is no indication that flipping the Earth's geomagnetic pulse would have any drastic effects on the planet or life on it. In fact, it already happens naturally every few 100,000 years. And a sudden flip of the North and South Poles would almost definitely not threaten any life. The migration cycles of some birds might get messed up, and Google Maps might continue to not work properly, but that's about it. The Sea Devils' return feels so anticlimactic. When a classic Who villain returned in the modern series previously, it felt like an event. They were a big part of the story, their return was a big deal. Here, though, they just feel like generic monster of the week. They also have this big sea monster that shows up a couple of times and then just never appears again and is never explained.
Don't let the swords touch your skin!
Now, remember in The Timeless Children when some guy offered to die in the Doctor's place and she just went along with it with almost no objection? Yeah, that was pretty cruel and cowardly, and it was particularly shitty when this action was never called out by the show. But here, the Doctor finds herself in the exact same position. Some guy offers to die in her place, and here is a better chance than ever for the Doctor, and the show, to redeem themselves, to make up for that cowardice, to have the Doctor, at the end of her life, show some character development and make the right decision.
We truly are a legend.
Why do I bother? I really thought we were behind this. The 13th Doctor hadn't made a bad moral decision in so long. I genuinely thought Series 13 was leaving that stuff behind. Such a letdown, man. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That's how I'd sum up Legend of the Sea Devils. Eve of the Daleks seemed to hold genuine promise, with interesting side characters and a level of subtext that led me to believe Chibnall might be giving it his all as he bows out of his role as showrunner. But this is just another of his episodes that just has nothing to it. The pacing is weird, the editing and choreography feel so amateur, and I don't care for these characters. The Sea Devils' plan is just stupid and makes no sense, they're underutilized and underexplained, and the episode ends with one last showcase of the 13th Doctor's awful morality. The one thing saving this episode is the bit where the Sea Devil calls the Doctor a twat.
Don't give out your card details. A lot of sharks out there.
Twat!
And with that, it's time for Jodie Whittaker's final episode as the Doctor. After 4 years of ups and downs and some more downs, we get The Power of the Doctor. An episode which I can best sum up as the physical embodiment of having ADHD. This episode has many different plots happening at once, which, as you can imagine, leads to the episode being overstuffed and confusing. But I must admit, this is an example of the chaos in the Chibnall era actually working for me. Maybe it's because the episode is an hour and a half long, so things actually have room to breathe. Maybe it's because this special just feels completely like the nonsensical Doctor Who that I can't help but have a soft spot for. Every showrunner seems to end their stint with a summary of what their work was all about. RTD ended his run with an emotional culmination that, while not being the most sensical narrative ever, still hooks you in with an earth-shattering conclusion that still manages to pay off the arcs of the era in a satisfying way. Moffat did the opposite. He ended his tenure with a smaller, slower narrative, a conclusion to the emotionally mature character piece of the Capaldi era, finally summarizing and deconstructing the main characters in a way Moffat had been building up to for years. With Chibnall? Yeah, this is his vision of Doctor Who, alright. The Power of the Doctor contains all his recurring motifs, countdowns to make the plot happen, new plot threads every few minutes that don't really go anywhere, unremarkable characters, a constant reliance on the show's past, and yet I still find myself enjoying it. So, the Master is Rasputin, and he's also a seismologist, and he somehow manages to convince Daleks and Cybermen to work together, and the Daleks want to turn all volcanoes into factories, and the Cybermen have a big planet that they also want to turn into a factory, and the Master becomes the Doctor. Imagine showing this video to a small Victorian child. The plot is so convoluted and confusing that I feel like a kid again when I watch it. I have no idea what's happening, but I am just happy to be along for the ride. Maybe the plots of the Chibnall era have been so egregious that he's finally melted my brain. I don't know. Now, there are some issues with the plot. Shocker. So, the Daleks want to turn all the volcanoes into factories. Sure. But then, later on, they decide to make the volcanoes erupt and flood the Earth with lava, which the Master is cool with. The Cybermen also want to convert all of humanity, but what will be left for them to convert when the Earth is flooded with lava? Considering these guys apparently have a big plan together, their motivations really contradict each other. Then, there's the Master's plan. He forces the Doctor to regenerate into him, so he can do bad things in her name and get her cancelled by space Twitter or something. I know people have said this is overly convoluted, that the Master could just pretend to be the Doctor anyway, but thematically, this is a really good culmination for this incarnation of the Master. His whole motivation throughout Series 12 was self-hatred and spite. He just discovered his whole existence comes from the Doctor and he was pissed. He always felt a level of reliance on the Doctor, whether he realized it or not. But now that reliance has been reinforced. He owes his whole existence to the Doctor and really does rely on them, but not by choice, and it really gets to him. You can also headcanon this as long-term development for the Doctor and the Master's relationship. The Doctor spent so much of his last incarnation trying to make the Master more like him, and here, the Doctor gets what they wanted, in the most twisted way possible. Again, if Missy was acknowledged at all here, this would be a heartbreaking subversion of her arc. This episode also sees the return of Tegan, who travelled with the 5th Doctor, and also the 4th Doctor for like 10 minutes, and Ace, the final companion of Classic Who. I'm gonna be honest, the material they're given to work with here is not great. They just do not talk like human beings, and I find it really off-putting. But they both have heartfelt conversations with their respective Doctors, and I love both of these scenes. Tegan decided to leave the Doctor after their adventures stopped being fun, and we never saw what happened between the Doctor and Ace on screen, but this episode confirms they fell out. So you've got two companions here who fell out of love of travelling with the Doctor. There's some real potential here for a connection to Yaz choosing to leave the Doctor at the end. But never mind. Speaking of previous Doctors showing up, this episode introduces the Guardians of the Edge, the place where a Time Lord consciousness goes to after regenerating. This is such a cool concept and take on regeneration, making for some really good scenes. Although, I can't help but feel like there are too many Doctors in this episode. I mean, there's the 1st, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 13th and 14th Doctors, plus the Ruth Doctor, plus the 13th Doctor spends most of this episode possessed by the Master. I can't lie, 13 feels a bit neglected in her own regeneration story, all the other Doctors and the Master kinda overshadowing her. I think an easy way to solve this while still keeping the plot more or less the same would be to have the Master possess the Doctor's mind, rather than physically becoming her. Not only would 13 feel like less of a background character in her own swan song, but it would also give Jodie a chance to really show off her range as she plays the maniacal, evil role of the Master. A recurring trait of the 13th Doctor is... No, not that. No, not that either. It's a constant sense of awe and wonder at the universe, constantly wanting to see new things that blow her away, and wanting enough time to see it all. Those themes feature heavily in this episode, with her marvelling at the Quarunks, and wanting more time when she realises her regeneration is approaching, resulting in this genuinely moving final interaction between her and Yaz. I'm not going to act like I'm the biggest fan of 13 or Yaz, but I can still appreciate this scene despite that. It's really well done and heartfelt. The Doctor is clearly sad and hurting, but she keeps it together for Yaz, and it's a really nice end for the two of them. There's also Dan's exit, which happens pretty suddenly, 10 minutes into the episode. He has a near-death experience and decides he doesn't want to keep risking it when he has a life he wants to commit to. I feel like this fits with what Dan was meant to be throughout Flux, an ordinary guy who got caught up in the adventure. It still feels kinda sudden though, mainly because we've barely actually seen him travelling with the Doctor, but it's a fine exit on its own. I just can't help but think that Dan deserved better. Oh yeah, there's also this plot point of a Dalek suddenly turning good.
A Dalek invades my TARDIS with a message offering to destroy its own species.
Yeah, no thanks, I have eyes I can see. Thing is, this isn't exactly new. Daleks turning good has happened a few times before, but the difference is that they were broken or genetically mutated. This one seems to have turned against its race unprompted though, which absolutely deserves its own episode. This plot point unfortunately feels very unexplored, which is a shame because it's a really interesting concept. The Cybermen also feel kinda generic. Yeah, there's vague themes of conversion, but they mostly feel like generic robots again, which is unfortunately nothing new for the show at this point. The lone Cyberman is back, and he has a cool one-take hallway scene. I like that. The Cybermasters are back too, and I like that, but other than that, the Cybermen are just kind of here. There's a recurring theme here, particularly at the end, of life after the Doctor, and I think this is a meta-commentary from Chibnall. Russell T Davies did end up replacing him, but there was a time while this episode was being made where it seemed like the BBC had no official plans to continue the show after the power of the Doctor. All the references to the past make it seem like this was meant to be a 60th anniversary of sorts before the show went off the air, and a love letter / victory lap for the show for making it this far. The Doctor saves the day with her big friend group she made throughout the last 3 series, as they all gather around the TARDIS to fix everything. Something Russell T Davies would shamelessly steal 14 years prior. This ending honestly feels like what the Vanquishers should have been, an actually somewhat competent culmination of 13's era. It wouldn't surprise me if the ending of Flux was meant to be more like this, just with more references to the Timeless Child arc, but perhaps the uncertainty of Doctor Who's future led to Chibnall making this more of a grand finale instead. So, the Doctor leaves Yaz, who goes off to find the companion support group, and the Doctor goes off to regenerate alone, facing her fears of loneliness and running out of time head on. The 13th Doctor regenerates, as a surprisingly familiar face replaces her. The power of the Doctor is a completely random, illogical, silly mess. But I can't help but love it. Yes, it's got its flaws, but it goes so far with its ridiculousness that you can't help but just enjoy the ride. It has some good themes of moving on and embracing the past while looking to the future, and appreciating Doctor Who for what it is, for how long it's been around, and for the joy and inspiration it continues to give to so many people. This is probably about as good as the 13th Doctor's final episode was going to be. And yes, it does feel like a slightly self-indulgent fanfiction, but I appreciate it for what it is, and I'm glad the Chibnall era could end on a high. Also, I didn't know when to bring this up, but why is Graham wearing a jacket inside a volcano? Is he stupid? Okay, to summarise, do I think the 13th Doctor era is as bad as people make it out to be? No. I actually think there's a fair bit of good to be found if you give it a fair chance. While making this video, I did a tier list of every episode just to see what my overall opinion on the 13th Doctor is, and for me, the good episodes just about outweigh the bad, with 16 episodes I like and 15 episodes I don't. I want to like this period of the show more than I do, and I did find myself enjoying it more this time around, but the best way I'd sum up the Chibnall era is missed potential. It feels like there are so many times throughout these episodes where a plot thread seems to be beginning, or a thematic connection to a previous episode or a character's arc could be made, but nothing comes of them. The show seems blissfully unaware of its own storylines or narrative potential, and it's actually quite frustrating to watch at times. I think a prime example of this is the 13th Doctor. Her whole thing is her childish, happy-go-lucky persona travelling the universe like a kid in a candy shop. Except that attitude results in her not considering the ramifications of her actions, repeatedly making questionable, contradictory, or downright evil decisions. I'm not opposed to a morally grey Doctor. As I said, I like the Doctor's arc in Series 8. But the idea of an inconsiderate, improvident Doctor is a very interesting direction to take the character, especially after the total deconstruction and dissection of who the Doctor is that occurred in the Capaldi era. All the show was missing here was a little bit of self-awareness, and she could have been one of the most unique and nuanced incarnations of the Doctor yet. All we needed was a little acknowledgement that the Doctor makes some wrong decisions, and one of the Chibnall era's most egregious recurring problems is basically solved. The 13th Doctor actively goes against almost everything the 12th Doctor tried to teach her in his final moments. And not only that, but the Spy Master is, I think unintentionally, a twisted subversion of Missy and her arc. The 13th Doctor era is kind of the antithesis of the 12th Doctor era, and I think the show's main pitfall was the refusal to acknowledge that contrast. The companions left quite a bit to be desired too. Yaz was in every 13th Doctor episode, and yet I don't think I could tell you anything about her other than she tries to be kind to people. She travels with the Doctor for ages, gets separated from her for 3 years at the start of the 20th century, and this has no impact on her as a character. She has no real noticeable character development other than developing a crush on the Doctor. Graham was definitely one of the most well-characterized of the main cast from the start, and he does have development over series 11 and 12, and has continued developing off-screen, as we see in The Power of the Doctor. Graham is actually pretty good, and Ryan spent most of his time on the show as a plank of wood, before actually getting kinda interesting at the end of Series 11 and immediately leaving. Graham and Ryan do clearly develop a strong, loving relationship while travelling with the Doctor, resulting in a surprisingly powerful exit for them. Dan feels like a bit of missed potential. I think he has the strongest introduction of any of the main cast, being set up as a fresh, ordinary pair of eyes in the Doctor's travels and the devastation of the Flux, only for him to be sidelined as an audience surrogate in place of Vinder and Bell. Not only that, but he spends about 10 minutes of screen time with the Doctor throughout Flux, and leaves after 2 episodes. Like I said earlier, he could have been great, but was pretty much reduced to Graham but Scouse. But his exit does fit with his character, and is a decent exit, albeit a bit sudden. Chibnall clearly wanted to make his mark on the show, with things like the Timeless Child and the Flux. And yeah, cool, make these lore changes, slay. The problem is that these changes, by admission of the show itself, don't really change anything, and they end up going nowhere. The Doctor is the foundation of Time Lord society and has an unknown amount of past lives she can't remember. Cool. But how does this affect the narrative? Well, she wants to know about her past, but eventually realizes her past doesn't define her. Then rinse and repeat. 3 more times. The only thing that comes from the Timeless Child reveal is the same arc for the Doctor over and over, All while the show insists to us time and time again that the reveal of the Timeless Child doesn't actually matter. So in that case, why do it? You've got a whole treasure trove of hidden lore to expand on here, so much possibility. Why keep insisting to us that it doesn't matter? Then there's the Flux. The Doctor's old gang from before she became a white man for 2,000 years decides to erase the universe because the secret of the Timeless Child is out. So, half the universe is destroyed. Which is never acknowledged by Chibnall again. Tecteun spawns in and is immediately killed. These guys spawn in and do literally fucking nothing. And the show gives us glimpses of another universe and immediately forgets about it. This ties back into my earlier point of the show being unaware of its own narrative potential. There was a story here, rich with promise beyond anything the show had dreamed of before, and it all gets cast aside and forgotten about. The Chibnall era could have been so much more, and it saddens me that it ended up turning out the way it did. If you're gonna shake the foundation of the show to its core, fucking do something with it, man. I think, for a time at least, the show hit its low point during the Chibnall era. I consider Series 11 the weakest series of the show. Thankfully, I think everything since then has been an improvement, with each series being better than the last. A decent chunk of the newest series did really feel like a return to form, so thankfully there is still life in the show, despite what many bad faith people say. One of the main reasons why I love Series 1 to 10 of the revival so much is because of all the overarching narratives. The balancing between character arcs and storylines, some of which span multiple series. Be it the Doctor's guilt from the Time War, his relationship with Clara, the Silence, Missy, the Daleks, just the overall interconnectivity of the RTD era, or the in-depth character studies of the Capaldi era. All this stuff came together to, despite the changes in showrunner and production team, make the story feel like it was still progressing long-term. The Chibnall era doesn't really have that. It's definitely more like classic Who, in that there's not a lot of thematic connection, things just kinda happen. It's not as emotionally constipated as classic Who, but it does overall feel like its own thing, rather than the continuation of where the story was going previously. I'm not saying that that's objectively a bad thing, I just prefer the long-term character-focused narratives we had before. There's still not a lot known about what production of this period of the show was like behind the scenes, other than the fact that COVID almost killed the show. I couldn't tell you what made the Chibnall era fall short the way it did, but for what it's worth, I can appreciate it for keeping the show alive. No matter what you think of Chibnall as a writer or a showrunner, you have to commend him for fighting tooth and nail to keep the show on the air during and after COVID. It's honestly a miracle that we got Flux at all, let alone the fact that it was actually mostly good. I know there are die-hard 13th Doctor fans out there. If that's you, and you made it all the way through this video, wow, genuinely thank you. And I hope this video wasn't too negative for you. Honestly, I'm glad you can see something in this period of the show that I can't. Even if you're not a 13th Doctor fan, I hope this video has at least encouraged you to give some of her episodes another shot. I recommend The Witchfinders, The Haunting of Villa Diodati, The Halloween Apocalypse, Village of the Angels, Eve of the Daleks, and The Power of the Doctor. But yeah, thank you very much if you sat through this entire thing, and remember, Chibnall bad.